I calmly set down my wine glass and smiled at my husband across our Christmas dinner table. "That's interesting, Marcus," I said as he finished announcing he was leaving me for his secretary to run my company. "But before you continue, there are some facts I think everyone should understand about what you've actually built." His face went completely white as I reached for the manila folder that would destroy his life. Victoria Sterling Hayes had built Aurora Digital Marketing from her own $3.2 million investment, transforming it into a thriving $12 million company. For 8 years, she'd watched her husband Marcus systematically erase her from their success story, positioning himself as the visionary founder while reducing her to the supportive wife. But when Victoria discovered suspicious charges on their company credit card, she uncovered something far worse than an affair. What she found would challenge everything she thought she knew about her marriage, her business, and her own judgment. The man she trusted with her heart and her fortune had been planning the ultimate betrayal, and he'd been documenting every step of his conspiracy in his own words. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Tonight, you're about to witness the most methodical takedown of a manipulative husband you've ever seen. And trust me, you won't see the final twist coming. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Aurora Digital Marketing's 20th floor office in downtown Portland, creating rivulets that distorted the city lights below into abstract paintings of amber and white. Victoria Sterling Hayes stood at those windows watching the December storm rage across the Willamette River, unaware that her carefully constructed world was about to shatter just as violently. At 38, Victoria possessed the kind of quiet confidence that came from building something substantial from nothing. Twice. Her reflection in the rain-streaked glass showed a woman who had learned to dress for boardrooms, rather than attention understated elegance that spoke of success earned rather than inherited. The Hermes watch on her wrist had been a gift to herself after selling her second startup for $4.4 million. That was 8 years ago, back when she still celebrated her victories openly. The memory of that celebration felt like it belonged to a different person now. Victoria could still recall the exact taste of the champagne she'd ordered at Le Bernardin Dom Perignon 1996, and the way the bubbles had tickled her nose as she toasted to her own success. She'd been 29 years old, sitting alone at the most expensive restaurant she could find, wearing a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and feeling absolutely no shame about celebrating herself. To Victoria Sterling, she'd whispered to her reflection in the champagne flute, who bet everything on herself and won. The first company, Sterling Web Solutions, had been born from frustration. Fresh out of Stanford's MBA program with a background in computer science, Victoria had watched established consulting firms charge outrageous fees for basic website development while delivering mediocre results months behind schedule. She'd started Sterling Web Solutions in her cramped San Francisco apartment with $15,000 in savings and a conviction that she could do better. The early days had been brutal. 18-hour workdays, ramen noodles for dinner more often than not, and client meetings conducted from coffee shops because she couldn't afford proper office space. But Victoria had possessed something her competitors lacked: genuine technical expertise, combined with business acumen that let her translate complex digital concepts into language her clients could understand and value. The breakthrough had come when she'd landed Pacific Insurance as a client. Their existing website was a disaster, slow, ugly, and completely ineffective at converting visitors into customers. Victoria had rebuilt their entire digital presence in 6 weeks, implementing e-commerce capabilities that increased their online sales by 300% in the first quarter. Word spread quickly in San Francisco's tight-knit business community. Within 18 months, Sterling Web Solutions was handling digital transformations for 12 major Bay Area companies, generating annual revenues approaching $2 million. When Technova Industries approached her with an acquisition offer, Victoria had been shocked by the numbers: $3.8 million for a company she'd started with pocket change and determination. The sale had validated everything Victoria believed about herself and her capabilities. But more than the money, it had given her something priceless: absolute confidence in her ability to build value from nothing. Data flow. Her second company had been even more ambitious. Social media analytics was an emerging field in 2014, with most businesses struggling to understand how their online presence translated into actual customer behavior. Victoria had seen the opportunity to create sophisticated tracking systems that could provide actionable insights rather than just vanity metrics. She'd assembled a team of data scientists and marketing professionals this time, starting with proper funding and professional office space in Soma. Dataflow's analytics platform could track customer journeys across multiple social media platforms, identifying exactly which posts, interactions, and campaigns generated real business results. The technology had been revolutionary for its time, but Victoria's real innovation had been in packaging complex data science into intuitive dashboards that marketing professionals could actually use. While competitors focused on impressive-looking charts that meant nothing, Dataflow delivered clear recommendations that directly improved their clients' bottom lines. By the time Microsoft's acquisition team came calling, Dataflow was processing social media analytics for over 200 companies, including 3 Fortune 500 corporations. The $4.4 million acquisition had established Victoria as one of the youngest female entrepreneurs in California to achieve multiple 8-figure exits. But success had come with unexpected isolation. The tech industry's boys' club mentality meant that Victoria's achievements were often attributed to luck timing or the assumption that she'd had help from male advisors. Networking events became exercises in patience as she endured condescending explanations of basic business concepts from men who'd never built anything approaching her level of success. It was at the Colorado Technology Summit in Denver, feeling particularly lonely after a panel discussion where she'd been introduced as the pretty face of data analytics, that Victoria had first encountered Marcus Hayes. His presentation on integrated digital marketing had been polished but fundamentally flawed. Marcus possessed natural charisma and an ability to make complex strategies sound accessible, but his financial projections were based more on optimism than market reality. When he'd concluded with a request for investment capital, Victoria had found herself simultaneously impressed by his confidence and concerned by his lack of substance. During the networking break, she'd approached him with genuine curiosity rather than romantic interest. "Interesting presentation," she'd said, extending her business card. "Though I noticed some gaps in your financial modeling. Are you looking for strategic investment or just capital?" Most men would have bristled at the implied criticism. Marcus had laughed a warm sound that suggested genuine appreciation rather than defensive deflection. "You're absolutely right. I'm much better at the big picture than the details." "Are you in finance?" "Strategy and operations," Victoria had replied, with a background in scaling tech companies. And that conversation had led to coffee the next morning, then dinner 2 days later, when Victoria had extended her Denver trip. Marcus had been refreshingly honest about his limitations, openly acknowledging that his business plan needed substantial development before it could attract serious investment. "I know what the market needs," he'd explained over dinner at a quiet restaurant in Lodo. "Small businesses are drowning in digital marketing options they don't understand. They need integrated strategies that actually work together, rather than a dozen different vendors who don't communicate with each other." Victoria had recognized the validity of his market analysis, even as she'd identified the numerous execution challenges he hadn't considered. Marcus had vision. She had the technical knowledge and business experience to make vision into reality. Their initial partnership discussions had felt like the beginning of something genuinely collaborative. Marcus would handle client relationships and business development areas where his natural charisma provided real value. Victoria would manage operations, financial planning, and strategic growth, the systematic work that had made her previous companies successful. The romantic element had developed, gradually emerging from late-night planning sessions and shared excitement about building something meaningful together. Marcus had seemed genuinely impressed by Victoria's accomplishments, often referencing her previous successes when discussing Aurora Digital's potential. "You've already proven you can build companies from nothing," he'd said during one of their early strategy meetings. "I just provide the vision and client management. You're the one who makes the magic happen." But that had been years ago, back when Marcus still valued her contributions and credited her publicly for Aurora Digital's success. Now, standing in the rain-soaked office with evidence of his betrayal weighing heavy in her mind, Victoria wondered when exactly that appreciative partner had transformed into someone capable of such elaborate deception. The man who had once called her the one who makes the magic happen was now systematically working to erase her from the very company she'd built. The irony was devastating. Marcus was using her own money to pay consultants who would help him steal everything she'd created. Tonight, those nagging concerns had crystallized into something harder to ignore: Victoria, you're still here. The voice belonged to Emma Chen, their operations manager, whose loyalty had been one of the few constants during Aurora Digital's rapid growth. It's past 9. Marcus left hours ago. Victoria turned from the window, offering the kind of smile that had become second nature, warm but carefully measured. Just reviewing the quarterly projections. You know how I am with numbers. Emma hesitated at the doorway, her expression suggesting she wanted to say something more. After 7 years at Aurora Digital, she'd developed an almost maternal concern for Victoria that went beyond professional courtesy. Have you eaten? I could order something from that Thai place you like? I'm fine, Emma. Really. Go home to David and the kids. But Victoria wasn't fine, and hadn't been for months. Something had shifted in the rhythm of her marriage and the dynamics of the company she'd helped build in the very fabric of her daily existence. Her husband, Marcus Hayes, Aurora Digital's charismatic CEO, had become increasingly distant, increasingly secretive, increasingly, different. The changes had been subtle at first. Longer hours at the office phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room weekend client emergencies that never seemed to generate follow-up meetings or paperwork. Most troubling were the small erasures, the way Marcus had begun introducing her at industry events as my wife rather than my business partner. The gradual exclusion from strategic planning sessions, the gentle but persistent suggestions that she might be happier focusing on operational oversight rather than the big picture decisions that had always energized her. Tonight, those nagging concerns had crystallized into something harder to ignore. She'd returned to the office after dinner to collect some files, expecting the building to be empty. Instead, she'd seen light coming from the parking garage and heard voices. Marcus's voice specifically, along with someone else's laughter that sounded distinctly feminine and decidedly intimate. Victoria had watched from the stairwell as her husband of 10 years embraced Ashley Kim, their 26-year-old marketing coordinator, in what was unmistakably more than a professional interaction. The kiss had lasted long enough to eliminate any possibility of misinterpretation, and the way Ashley's hands had tangled in Marcus's hair suggested a familiarity that spoke of practice, of routine, of relationship. The confrontation that followed had been swift and devastating in its dishonesty. You're being paranoid, Marcus had said with the kind of exasperated patience typically reserved for unreasonable children. Ashley was upset about some personal issues. I was offering friendly support. That's what good managers do. When Victoria described exactly what she'd witnessed, Marcus's expression had shifted from defensive to concerned, as if her accusations revealed a troubling psychological state rather than observable reality. Honey, I think the stress of the expansion might be affecting your judgment. Maybe you should consider taking some time off, getting some perspective. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that Victoria had found herself questioning her own perceptions even as her rational mind insisted otherwise. This wasn't the first time Marcus had responded to her concerns by suggesting she was overreacting, overthinking, or overwhelmed. It had become his standard deflection technique, one that left her feeling simultaneously angry and uncertain. Now alone in her office, with Rain providing the only soundtrack, Victoria decided to trust her instincts over her husband's explanations. She opened her laptop and navigated to the company's financial dashboard, something she'd been doing less frequently as Marcus had gradually assumed control of most administrative functions. The first anomaly appeared immediately. Phoenix Consulting Solutions, $52,000 in payments over the past 4 months. Victoria stared at the line items, searching her memory for any mention of Phoenix Consulting in budget meetings, strategic planning sessions, or casual conversations. Nothing. She cross-referenced the vendor against their approved consulting roster and found no matching entry. The payments had been authorized by Marcus, categorized under strategic development, and processed without her knowledge or approval. As co-founder and chief strategy officer, Victoria should have been aware of any consulting engagement over $10,000. The fact that Marcus had bypassed their standard approval process raised immediate red flags, especially given what she'd witnessed in the parking garage. She pulled up detailed transaction records, noting that the Phoenix Consulting payments coincided almost exactly with Marcus's increased secrecy and emotional distance. The timing felt deliberate, calculated, suspicious. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Working late again. Come home. We need to talk about your concerns from earlier. Victoria studied the message, analyzing the word choice like a forensic linguist. Your concerns rather than what happened or the situation. Already, he was framing tonight's incident as her problem rather than his behavior. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Instead of responding to Marcus, she called Janet Rodriguez, their chief financial officer, and one of the few people who'd been with Aurora Digital since its founding. Victoria, it's late. Is everything okay? Janet, I need to ask you about Phoenix Consulting Solutions. We've paid them $52,000 in the past 4 months, but I don't have any records of what services they've provided. A pause. Oh, that. Marcus asked me to handle those payments directly. He said it was sensitive consulting work that needed to stay confidential for competitive reasons. Competitive reasons. Business development strategy, market analysis, that sort of thing. He mentioned that the consulting involved potential acquisition targets and needed to stay quiet until negotiations were further along. Victoria felt her stomach tighten. Marcus hadn't mentioned any acquisition discussions to her, despite the fact that major business development initiatives fell squarely within her area of responsibility. Did he provide any documentation, contracts, deliverables, progress reports? He said everything was being handled verbally to maintain confidentiality. The invoices came directly from Phoenix Consulting, with minimal detail just like strategic consulting services and payment amounts. After ending the call, Victoria sat in the gathering darkness of her office processing the implications. $52,000 in undocumented consulting fees authorized by her husband without her knowledge during a period when their marriage and business partnership had been deteriorating. The coincidence felt too convenient to be coincidental. She returned to the financial records this time looking for other anomalies. What she found made her feel physically sick. Hotel charges in Seattle, San Francisco, and Las Vegas that didn't correspond to any business trips in Marcus's calendar. Restaurant bills for 2 at establishments she'd never visited processed on company credit cards during times when Marcus claimed to be in client meetings. Shopping charges at jewelry stores, department stores, and boutiques that suggested someone was using Aurora Digital's resources for personal expenses. The pattern painted a picture of systematic financial misconduct disguised as business expenses. More troubling was the realization that Marcus had been conducting this parallel life for months, possibly longer, while maintaining the facade of a committed husband and business partner. Victoria's hands shook as she scrolled through transaction after transaction that told the story of her husband's betrayal. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and completely at odds with the man she thought she'd married. Her phone rang, startling her from her investigation. Marcus's name appeared on the screen along with his photo, a picture she'd taken 2 years ago during their anniversary dinner, when she'd still believed in their partnership, their marriage, their shared future. Where are you? His voice carried an edge of irritation that she'd learned to recognize as a warning sign. I've been waiting for you to come home so we can clear up this misunderstanding. I'm at the office reviewing some financial records. Financial records, Victoria, it's almost 10 o'clock on a Friday night. Whatever you're looking at can wait until Monday. Actually, it can't wait. Victoria's voice was steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Marcus, I need you to explain Phoenix Consulting Solutions. $52,000 in payments that I never approved or even knew about. The silence that followed lasted long enough for Victoria to wonder if the call had dropped. When Marcus finally spoke, his tone had shifted from irritated to carefully controlled. Phoenix Consulting is handling some sensitive business development work. I didn't want to burden you with the details until we had something concrete to discuss. Burden me, Marcus. I'm the chief strategy officer. Business development is literally my job. Victoria, you've been under a lot of stress lately. I thought it would be better to handle this particular initiative independently, at least in the preliminary stages. There it was again, the suggestion that her concerns stemmed from personal inadequacy rather than legitimate business issues. The gaslighting technique that had become Marcus's default response to accountability. What kind of business development requires $52,000 in consulting fees with no documentation, no contracts, and no deliverables? The kind that involves confidential market research and competitive analysis. Look, we can discuss this properly when you get home. I don't think a financial audit is the best use of your Friday evening. Victoria ended the call without responding, her anger crystallizing into something sharper and more focused. Marcus's dismissive tone, his refusal to provide basic information about substantial company expenditures, his assumption that he could deflect her questions by suggesting she was overreacting. All of it confirmed what she'd been reluctant to acknowledge. Her husband was stealing from their company and lying about it with the same casual confidence he'd used to deny his affair with Ashley Kim. She pulled up the business registry database and searched for Phoenix Consulting Solutions. The company had been incorporated 6 months ago in Delaware, which was unusual but not necessarily suspicious. The registered agent was listed as Brighton Business Services, a corporate formation company that specialized in maintaining privacy for its clients. A deeper search revealed that Phoenix Consulting's business address was a virtual office in downtown Portland, essentially a mailing service that provided a professional address without physical office space. The phone number listed on their incorporation documents went to voicemail with a generic greeting that revealed nothing about the nature of their services. Victoria tried calling anyway, knowing the office would be closed, but hoping for additional information from their voicemail system. Instead, she got a recorded message that was both professional and deliberately vague. "You've reached Phoenix Consulting Solutions. Please leave a detailed message including your name, contact information, and the nature of your inquiry. We'll respond within 24 hours. The voice belonged to a woman professionally trained but unfamiliar. Victoria didn't leave a message. She spent the next 2 hours creating a comprehensive documentation file screenshots of financial records, transaction details, and timeline correlations between suspicious expenses and Marcus's behavioral changes. The evidence painted a picture of systematic deception that went far beyond a simple affair. Marcus wasn't just cheating on their marriage. He was stealing from their business and using company resources to fund his parallel life with Ashley Kim. The $52,000 paid to Phoenix Consulting was likely connected to this broader pattern of financial misconduct, though Victoria couldn't yet determine the exact nature of the consulting services. As she prepared to leave the office, Victoria's phone buzzed with another text from Marcus. "I'm worried about you. You've been working too much lately, and I think it's affecting your perspective on normal business operations. Come home so we can talk about getting you some support." The message was a masterpiece of manipulation, expressing concern while simultaneously suggesting that Victoria's investigation stemmed from psychological instability rather than legitimate discovery of wrongdoing. It was the kind of response that would have made her question her own judgment 6 months ago. Tonight, it simply confirmed that Marcus had moved beyond casual deception into active psychological manipulation. Victoria drove home through the rain-soaked streets of Portland, her mind racing with implications and possibilities. The Tudor-style house in the Pearl District had been their dream home purchased 3 years ago when Aurora Digital's success had made such luxuries possible. Now it felt like a stage set for a performance that had been running longer than she'd realized. Marcus was waiting in the living room, having staged the scene for maximum emotional impact. He'd changed into the gray cashmere sweater she'd bought him for Christmas the previous year, opened a bottle of their wedding wine, and dimmed the lights to create an atmosphere of intimate conversation. "I was getting worried," he said, rising to embrace her with what appeared to be genuine affection. "You've been putting in such long hours lately. I think you might be burning yourself out." Victoria accepted the embrace while studying his face for Tell's micro-expressions that might reveal the gap between his words and his intentions. Marcus had always been skilled at managing his public presentation, but 10 years of marriage had taught her to recognize the subtle signs of performance versus authenticity. "We need to talk about Phoenix Consulting," she said, stepping back from his embrace. "I need detailed information about what services they're providing and why these expenditures weren't discussed with me." Marcus's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the kind of change that might be invisible to someone who hadn't spent a decade learning to read his moods. The warmth in his eyes became more calculated, and his smile took on the practiced quality she'd seen him use with difficult clients. "Victoria, I understand your concern, but I think you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Phoenix Consulting is handling preliminary research for a potential expansion into the Seattle market. The work is confidential because we don't want competitors to know we're considering geographic expansion until we're ready to execute." The explanation was smooth, detailed enough to sound credible, and delivered with Marcus's signature confidence. It was also completely contradicted by the financial evidence Victoria had spent the evening analyzing. If Phoenix Consulting is doing market research for Seattle expansion, why are their hotel charges in Las Vegas and San Francisco on the same dates as their invoices? And why are there restaurant bills for two when you told me you were working alone on this project? Marcus's pause was fractional, barely noticeable, but Victoria caught it. When he responded, his tone carried a subtle shift toward patronizing patience. The Las Vegas and San Francisco trips were related to client meetings that happened to coincide with the consulting timeline. The restaurant charges were for meals with potential partners and local business contacts. Everything you're questioning has legitimate business explanations. Then you won't mind providing documentation. Contracts with Phoenix Consulting deliverables, they've provided meeting notes from your client meetings, contact information for these potential partners. Victoria. Marcus's voice carried a warning, now the kind of tone that had historically ended arguments through sheer force of authority. I think you're losing perspective here. This level of micromanagement isn't healthy for our business relationship or our marriage. You're treating me like a criminal instead of your husband and business partner. The accusation was designed to make Victoria feel guilty for asking reasonable questions about substantial financial irregularities. It was emotional manipulation disguised as reasonable concern, and it confirmed what she'd begun to suspect: Marcus's deception was far more sophisticated and long-standing than a simple affair. I'm treating you like the chief executive officer of a company that spent $52,000 without proper documentation. If you can provide legitimate business justification for these expenses, I'll be happy to apologize for my concerns. Marcus stood up, moving to the window with the kind of dramatic gesture that suggested wounded dignity, rather than guilty panic. When he turned back to face her, his expression had hardened into something Victoria had rarely seen directed at her. I've been protecting you from the more complex aspects of business development because I thought you preferred to focus on operational strategy. But if you insist on inserting yourself into every aspect of company management, perhaps we need to have a broader conversation about role definition and responsibility allocation. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Question my authority, and I'll question your position in the company. It was the kind of power play that revealed how Marcus viewed their supposedly equal partnership. He saw himself as the real leader, with Victoria serving in a subordinate role that he could modify or eliminate if she became too difficult to manage. Are you suggesting that asking questions about undocumented expenditures is inappropriate for the chief strategy officer? I'm suggesting that trust is fundamental to both marriage and business partnerships. If you can't trust me to handle confidential business development appropriately, then we have bigger problems than Phoenix Consulting. Marcus's response was psychologically sophisticated, reframing Victoria's legitimate concerns as evidence of relationship dysfunction. It was the kind of argument that would force most people to choose between pursuing their questions and preserving their marriage. Victoria had spent enough years in business to recognize when someone was trying to end a conversation through intimidation rather than address the substance of her concerns. Marcus's refusal to provide basic documentation, his immediate resort to emotional manipulation, and his suggestion that her questions were somehow inappropriate all pointed toward guilty knowledge rather than innocent misunderstanding. I'll need to see the Phoenix Consulting contract and their deliverables by Monday morning, she said calmly. If this is legitimate business development, providing that documentation shouldn't be a problem. Marcus's face flushed slightly, the kind of physical response that suggested her request had hit a nerve. Victoria. I'm trying to be patient here, but your behavior tonight is completely unacceptable. You're treating me like an employee rather than your husband. I'm treating you like the CEO of a company that needs to account for its expenses. The fact that you're my husband makes this conversation more difficult, not less necessary. Fine. Marcus's voice had taken on the clipped tone he used when negotiations weren't going his way. I'll have Janet compile whatever documentation you think you need. But I want you to consider whether this kind of adversarial approach is really the foundation you want for our business relationship going forward. The conditional phrasing, whatever documentation you think you need, suggested that Marcus intended to provide minimal information rather than comprehensive answers. His framing of her request as adversarial was another manipulation technique designed to make her feel guilty for pursuing legitimate business questions. Victoria went to bed that night knowing that her marriage and business partnership had crossed a line from which there might be no return. Marcus's behavior had revealed a level of deception and manipulation that went far beyond what she'd previously suspected, and his response to her questions had confirmed that he viewed their supposedly equal partnership in fundamentally different terms than she did. She lay awake listening to Marcus's breathing, analyzing the events of the evening and their implications for everything she'd built over the past 8 years. Aurora Digital Marketing had grown from her initial $3.2 million investment into a company that now employed 47 people and generated annual revenues approaching $12 million. The success had been built on her strategic vision, her business acumen, and her ability to identify market opportunities that others missed. Marcus had been an excellent operational partner, handling client relationships and day-to-day management with skill and charisma. But the fundamental driver of Aurora Digital's growth had been Victoria's investment capital and strategic decision-making. Now it seemed that Marcus had begun to view the company's success as his personal achievement rather than their shared accomplishment. The systematic exclusion from financial oversight, the undocumented consulting expenses, the affair with Ashley Kim, all of it suggested that Marcus was positioning himself to claim sole credit for Aurora Digital's success while marginalizing Victoria's contributions. The realization was both devastating and clarifying. Victoria had spent months questioning her own perceptions, wondering if her concerns about Marcus's behavior were evidence of paranoia or jealousy. Tonight's confrontation had confirmed that her instincts were correct. Marcus was systematically deceiving her about both personal and professional matters. Saturday morning brought no additional clarity from Marcus, who left early for what he described as a client emergency that required immediate attention. The timing felt convenient rather than coincidental, giving him an excuse to avoid follow-up conversations about Phoenix Consulting, while potentially buying time to manufacture whatever documentation he thought might satisfy Victoria's questions. She spent the morning reviewing Aurora Digital's corporate structure, something she hadn't examined in detail since the company's founding. What she discovered provided the first piece of good news in an otherwise devastating situation. Aurora Digital Marketing was technically a subsidiary of Sterling Holdings, LLC, the investment company Victoria had established to manage her various business interests. While Marcus served as CEO of Aurora Digital, ultimate ownership remained with Sterling Holdings, which Victoria controlled entirely. The corporate structure meant that any major business decisions, including asset transfers, ownership changes, or significant financial commitments, required Victoria's authorization as the controlling shareholder of the parent company. Marcus's authority was limited to day-to-day operational decisions and expenditures below certain predetermined thresholds. The $52,000 payments to Phoenix Consulting had exceeded those thresholds, which meant Marcus had technically violated the corporate governance agreements they'd established when Aurora Digital was founded. If the consulting services proved to be illegitimate or fraudulent, Victoria would have clear legal grounds for removing Marcus from his position and potentially pursuing criminal charges for embezzlement. The legal protections provided some comfort, but they didn't address the emotional devastation of discovering that her husband had been systematically deceiving her for months or possibly years. Victoria had always prided herself on her ability to read people and situations accurately. The realization that Marcus had been manipulating her perceptions while conducting an affair and potentially stealing from their company was a fundamental challenge to her sense of professional and personal competence. She decided to call her college roommate and closest friend, Rebecca Santos, who had built a successful divorce law practice in Seattle, specializing in high-asset cases involving business partnerships. If anyone could provide both legal and emotional guidance for navigating this situation, it would be Rebecca. Victoria. It's been too long. How are things in Portland? Actually, that's why I'm calling. I need legal advice and I need someone I can trust completely. The shift in Rebecca's tone was immediate, moving from casual friendship to professional focus. What's going on? Victoria spent 30 minutes outlining everything she'd discovered: the affair with Ashley Kim, the undocumented consulting expenses, Marcus's refusal to provide documentation, and the broader pattern of financial irregularities. As she spoke, she could hear Rebecca taking notes, asking clarifying questions with the methodical precision of someone building a legal case. Victoria, what you're describing sounds like a systematic campaign of fraud and embezzlement disguised as business expenses. The affair is personally devastating, but the financial misconduct is potentially criminal. That's what I was afraid of. The good news is that you're in a much stronger legal position than Marcus probably realizes. Aurora Digital being a subsidiary of your holding company means you have ultimate control over major business decisions. If he's been making unauthorized expenditures above your established thresholds, he's been violating corporate governance agreements regardless of whether the expenses were legitimate. Rebecca paused, and Victoria could hear papers rustling as she reviewed her notes. The bad news is that this level of deception suggests Marcus has been planning something bigger than just an affair and some unauthorized expenses. $52,000 for undocumented consulting services doesn't happen accidentally. Someone paid Phoenix Consulting for specific work, and you need to find out what that work involved. How do I do that without alerting Marcus that I'm investigating? Very carefully. The first step is securing all the evidence you've already gathered. Make copies of financial records, save everything to secure storage that Marcus can't access, and document your investigation process in case you need to provide evidence later. And then we figure out what Phoenix Consulting actually does and why Marcus paid them $52,000 to do it. My guess is that their services are related to business consulting or legal strategy, possibly involving partnership dissolution or asset protection. If Marcus is planning to push you out of Aurora Digital, he would need professional help to structure the transaction legally. The suggestion hit Victoria like a physical blow. The idea that Marcus might be actively planning to eliminate her from the company she'd founded and funded was almost too devastating to process. Rebecca, do you really think he would try to steal the entire company? Victoria, I've seen cases where spouses attempt to hide assets worth tens of millions of dollars during divorce proceedings. $52,000 in consulting fees suggests someone is planning something substantial and complex. You need to assume the worst-case scenario and prepare accordingly. After ending the call with Rebecca, Victoria sat in her home office surrounded by the evidence of Marcus's deception, trying to process the implications of what she'd discovered. In less than 24 hours, her understanding of her marriage, her business partnership, and her future had been completely upended. The man she'd loved and trusted for 10 years had been systematically betraying her while using her own company's resources to fund his deception. The business she'd built from her own investment capital and strategic vision was apparently being targeted for theft by the person she'd trusted to help her grow it. Most devastating was the realization that Marcus's manipulation had been so sophisticated that she'd begun to question her own perceptions and judgment. How long had he been gaslighting her into accepting a diminished role in her own company? How many of her concerns had he dismissed as evidence of stress or paranoia, rather than legitimate observations of his wrongdoing? Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Client emergency resolved. Taking Ashley to lunch to discuss the Morrison project. Should be back in the office by 3. The casual mention of Ashley felt like deliberate provocation, a test to see how Victoria would respond to evidence of their continued collaboration. The timing was also suspicious. Lunch meetings on Saturday suggested either an unusual level of dedication to client service or a convenient excuse for spending time together. Instead of responding to Marcus, Victoria decided to take Rebecca's advice and begin securing evidence of his financial misconduct. She drove to Aurora Digital's office using her keycard to access the building on a Saturday afternoon when it would be virtually empty. The executive floor was eerily quiet, with only the hum of climate control systems and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Victoria made her way to Marcus's office, knowing that his tendency toward physical documentation might provide additional evidence beyond what she'd found in digital financial records. Marcus's office reflected his personality carefully, curated to project success and authority, with expensive furniture and strategically placed awards and accolades. The overall effect was impressive, but somehow hollow, like a stage set designed to convince visitors of the occupant's importance. Victoria began methodically searching through Marcus's desk drawers, filing cabinets, and personal storage areas. Most of what she found was routine business correspondence and operational documents that confirmed her understanding of Aurora Digital's day-to-day activities. But in the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, behind folders of old client contracts, she discovered something that made her stomach drop: a manila folder labeled Confidential Strategic Planning that contained documents she'd never seen before. The first document was a consulting agreement between Aurora Digital Marketing and Phoenix Consulting Solutions, dated 6 months ago and signed by Marcus without her knowledge or approval. The agreement called for comprehensive strategic analysis of business restructuring opportunities, with a total fee of $75,000, significantly more than the $52,000 in payments she'd already discovered. The second document was even more alarming. A preliminary report from Phoenix Consulting titled Partnership Dissolution Strategy for Aurora Digital Marketing, and the report outlined various scenarios for optimizing ownership structure and streamlining decision-making authority through strategic reorganization of partnership dynamics. Victoria read through the report with growing horror, recognizing that it was essentially a blueprint for removing her from the company she'd founded. The document analyzed her legal rights as the controlling shareholder of Sterling Holdings, identified potential vulnerabilities in their corporate structure, and recommended strategies for minimizing disruption during leadership transition. Most disturbing was a section titled Asset Protection and Transfer Strategies that outlined methods for moving Aurora Digital's client relationships, intellectual property, and operational assets to a new entity that would be controlled exclusively by Marcus. The recommended approach involved gradual client migration, key employee recruitment, and strategic positioning to minimize legal challenges from the displaced partner. Phoenix Consulting had essentially provided Marcus with a detailed plan for stealing her company while making the theft appear legitimate and strategic, rather than fraudulent and personal. The final document in the folder was a draft incorporation filing for a new company called Hayes Digital Solutions, LLC, with Marcus listed as the sole owner and CEO. The business purpose was listed as Digital Marketing and Business Consulting Services, essentially a duplicate of Aurora Digital's operations that could serve as the destination for transferred clients and assets. Victoria photographed every document with her phone, her hands shaking as the full scope of Marcus's betrayal became clear. This wasn't just an affair with a younger employee or casual misuse of company funds. This was a comprehensive, professionally planned conspiracy to steal everything she'd built while leaving her with legal ownership of an empty corporate shell. The sophistication of the planning was almost impressive in its audacity. Marcus had spent months developing a strategy to systematically transfer Aurora Digital's value to a new company that he would control exclusively, all while maintaining the facade of a troubled but salvageable marriage and business partnership. As Victoria left the office building, her mind raced with the implications of what she'd discovered. Marcus wasn't just planning to leave her for Ashley Kim. He was planning to destroy her professionally while enriching himself with assets that belonged to her. The careful documentation of his strategy suggested that he believed he could execute this plan without serious legal consequences. But Marcus had made a critical error in his planning. He'd underestimated both Victoria's investigative capabilities and her legal position as the ultimate owner of Aurora Digital through Sterling Holdings. His conspiracy was comprehensively documented, which meant Victoria now had evidence of his fraudulent intent that could be used both in criminal proceedings and civil litigation. More importantly, Marcus's plan depended on Victoria remaining unaware of his intentions until it was too late to prevent the asset transfers. Her discovery of the Phoenix Consulting documents meant she could now prepare countermeasures, while Marcus continued to believe his conspiracy was proceeding undetected. Driving home through Portland's rain-soaked streets, Victoria felt a strange combination of devastation and clarity. The personal betrayal was more comprehensive than she'd imagined, but the legal and financial situation was more favorable than Marcus apparently realized. Her husband had spent $52,000 of their company's money to develop a plan for stealing her life's work. Now it was time to show him exactly why that had been a catastrophic mistake. The transformation from victim to strategic opponent had begun. Victoria spent Sunday morning in her home office, surrounded by printed copies of every document she'd photographed from Marcus's files. The evidence spread across her mahogany desk told a story of betrayal so comprehensive that she struggled to process its full implications. Her husband hadn't just been unfaithful. He'd been planning to systematically destroy her professional life while enriching himself with her own assets. The Phoenix Consulting documents revealed a level of premeditation that bordered on criminal conspiracy. Marcus had paid professional consultants to develop strategies for stealing her company, transferring her clients, and positioning himself as the legitimate successor to everything she'd built. The consulting agreement alone represented a violation of their corporate governance structure that could result in both civil and criminal penalties. But understanding the scope of Marcus's betrayal was only the first step. Victoria needed to develop a comprehensive response strategy that would protect her interests while exposing his fraud in a way that would prevent him from simply moving to another approach. Rebecca Santos had been clear this level of sophisticated planning suggested Marcus was prepared for contingencies and legal challenges. Her phone rang at 9:30, interrupting her analysis. Marcus's name appeared on the screen along with his photo from their last anniversary dinner, a reminder of how completely she'd misread his intentions and character. "Good morning, beautiful. I was thinking we could drive up to Hood River today, maybe visit that winery you mentioned last month." The weather's supposed to clear up this afternoon. The suggestion was so normal, so reminiscent of their early years together, that Victoria felt a moment of cognitive dissonance. How could the man who was planning to steal her company sound so genuinely affectionate? How had she shared a bed with someone capable of such elaborate deception without sensing the depth of his duplicity? That sounds nice, but I have some work to catch up on. Maybe another time. Victoria, you've been working every weekend for months. I'm worried you're burning yourself out over things that aren't really that urgent. There it was again, the subtle suggestion that her concerns and priorities were somehow excessive or misguided. Marcus had been conditioning her for months to accept his judgment over her own, preparing her to defer to his authority when he finally made his move to eliminate her from Aurora Digital. I'll be fine. Enjoy your Sunday. And after ending the call, Victoria immediately dialed Rebecca Santos, knowing her friend would be preparing for her Monday court appearances, but needing legal guidance before taking any irreversible steps. Victoria, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. Have you found any additional evidence? Much worse than I expected. Victoria described the Phoenix Consulting documents in detail, watching Rebecca's responses through their video call, as the full scope of Marcus's conspiracy became clear. Jesus Christ, Victoria. This isn't just embezzlement anymore. What you're describing is a comprehensive plan to defraud you of your entire business. The fact that it's documented in such detail makes it almost easier to prosecute, but it also suggests Marcus has been planning this for much longer than you initially thought. Rebecca, I need to know what my options are. Can I have him arrested immediately? Theoretically, yes. You have evidence of embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy to commit fraud. But if you move too quickly, you might not recover all the evidence or prevent him from executing contingency plans you haven't discovered yet. Rebecca paused, and Victoria could see her reviewing notes on her tablet. My recommendation is that we build an ironclad case before making any moves that would alert Marcus to your investigation. Right now, he thinks he's operating undetected. That gives you a significant strategic advantage, but only if you use it carefully. What does building an ironclad case look like? First, we need to understand the full scope of his planning. You've found evidence of the Phoenix Consulting strategy, but there might be additional consultants, legal advisors, or co-conspirators involved. Second, we need to secure all financial records and evidence before Marcus can destroy or alter them. Third, we need to identify any assets that might have already been transferred or hidden. Victoria felt overwhelmed by the complexity of what Rebecca was describing. This sounds like it could take months. Meanwhile, Marcus continues stealing from the company and potentially executing parts of his plan. Victoria, I understand the urgency, but consider what happens if you confront Marcus now with incomplete information. He could claim the Phoenix Consulting work was legitimate business planning, destroy evidence you haven't found, yet accelerate his timeline for asset transfers, or simply disappear with whatever resources he's already hidden. The logic was sound but emotionally devastating. Victoria would have to continue living with Marcus working alongside him and pretending ignorance of his betrayal while building a case that could ultimately destroy his life and career. How long do you think this investigation will take? If we're systematic and careful, probably 4 to 6 weeks. I know that feels like an eternity, but consider the alternative if you move too quickly. And Marcus escapes serious consequences, he might simply relocate and attempt the same strategy with another victim. After ending the call with Rebecca, Victoria spent the rest of Sunday developing what she privately called the Documentation Project, a comprehensive investigation strategy designed to expose every aspect of Marcus's conspiracy while maintaining her cover as an unknowing victim. The first phase would focus on expanding her understanding of the financial fraud. The $52,000 paid to Phoenix Consulting was likely just the beginning. A conspiracy this sophisticated would require additional professional services and probably involve other unauthorized expenditures that she hadn't yet discovered. Victoria had legitimate access to Aurora Digital's financial records through her role as Chief Strategy Officer and her ownership of Sterling Holdings. Her challenge would be conducting a thorough audit without alerting Marcus or other employees to her investigation. She decided to approach Emma Chen, their operations manager, whose loyalty and discretion had been demonstrated over 7 years of employment. Emma's position gave her access to administrative systems and operational information that would be crucial for understanding the full scope of Marcus's activities. Monday morning brought an unseasonable break in Portland's winter rain, with clear skies and crisp air that felt like a good omen for beginning her counteroffensive. Victoria arrived at Aurora Digital early, wanting to speak with Emma before Marcus arrived and potentially overheard their conversation. Emma, I need to ask you about some administrative matters, and I need you to keep our conversation completely confidential. Emma's expression immediately became serious. Of course. Is everything okay? I'm conducting a routine audit of our consulting expenses and vendor relationships. I've noticed some irregularities that I want to investigate quietly before involving external auditors or making any formal accusations. The explanation was technically accurate while avoiding the more dramatic reality of Marcus's betrayal. Victoria needed Emma's help without burdening her with information that could put her in an impossible position between competing loyalties. What kind of irregularities? Payments to vendors. I'm not familiar with consulting fees that don't have corresponding deliverables, expense patterns that don't match our normal operational procedures. Nothing that's necessarily problematic, but enough to warrant a closer look. And Emma nodded clearly. Understanding the sensitivity of financial audits in a closely held company. What do you need from me? Access to detailed expense reports for the past 12 months, vendor contact information and payment history, and any documentation related to consulting agreements or professional services, contracts that might not have crossed my desk. I can have most of that ready by tomorrow morning. Some of the vendor documentation might take longer if it's stored in Marcus's files. Victoria felt a chill at the mention of Marcus's files, knowing what she'd already found there, and wondering what additional evidence might be waiting for discovery. Actually, let's start with what you can access through administrative systems. If we need Marcus's files, I'll handle that separately. Tuesday morning brought Emma's initial findings, which confirmed Victoria's worst fears while revealing additional layers of deception she hadn't anticipated. The detailed expense reports showed a pattern of questionable charges extending back almost 18 months, suggesting Marcus's conspiracy had been developing much longer than the Phoenix consulting timeline indicated. Victoria, I found some things that seem unusual, Emma said, closing the conference room door behind her and speaking in the hushed tones reserved for sensitive conversations. The documentation Emma provided was damning in its comprehensiveness. Beyond the Phoenix consulting payments, Aurora Digital had paid substantial sums to 3 other consulting firms: Sterling Business Advisors, $23,000, Pacific Strategic Solutions, $30,000, and Northwest Legal Consulting, $18,000. None of these expenditures had been approved through normal channels, and none had generated deliverables that Emma could locate. Emma, in your experience, would Marcus typically authorize consulting fees at these levels without involving me? Never. You've always been very specific that consulting engagements over $10,000 require your approval. Marcus knows that policy as well as anyone. The pattern suggested that Marcus had been systematically violating their established financial controls while hiding his activities from both Victoria and the administrative staff who might notice irregularities. There's something else, Emma continued, her voice dropping even lower. I've been tracking Marcus's calendar entries over the past 6 months, and there are a lot of meetings listed as external consultation or strategic planning that don't seem to correlate with any of our normal business activities. What do you mean? Meetings scheduled for 2 or 3 hours with no attendee information, no follow-up tasks, and no documentation of outcomes. Sometimes these meetings are scheduled during times when Marcus told other people he was handling client emergencies or working from home. Victoria felt her stomach tighten as she recognized the implications. Marcus had been conducting regular meetings related to his conspiracy while lying to employees about his activities and whereabouts. Emma, I need you to compile a comprehensive timeline of these meetings, cross-referenced with the consulting payments and any other unusual expenses. Can you do that without alerting Marcus to what you're working on? Absolutely. I'll work on it during off hours and keep everything on my personal laptop. The revelation that Marcus's deception extended back 18 months fundamentally changed Victoria's understanding of their marriage and business relationship. This wasn't a recent development triggered by midlife crisis or opportunistic infidelity. It was a long-term strategy that had been developing almost since Aurora Digital achieved substantial success. Victoria spent Tuesday afternoon reviewing the evidence Emma had provided, looking for patterns and connections that might reveal the full scope of Marcus's planning. What she discovered was a timeline of systematic preparation that demonstrated both patience and ruthless calculation. The consulting payments had begun small and irregular $5,000 here, $8,000 there before escalating to the more substantial amounts that had caught Victoria's attention. The progression suggested Marcus had been testing the financial controls and her oversight capabilities before committing to larger expenditures. More disturbing was the correlation between consulting payments and significant business milestones for Aurora Digital. The first payments to Sterling business advisors had coincided with their largest client acquisition. Payments to Pacific Strategic Solutions had begun shortly after Victoria had declined a lucrative acquisition offer that would have required giving up operational control. The Phoenix consulting engagement had started immediately after Aurora Digital had achieved $12 million in annual revenue. Marcus appeared to have been planning his conspiracy to coincide with Aurora Digital, reaching a level of success that would make the theft worthwhile, while providing him with sufficient resources to establish a competing business. Wednesday brought an unexpected complication when Ashley Kim approached Victoria in the office hallway with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Victoria, I wanted to talk to you about something that's been bothering me. Do you have a few minutes?" Victoria's first instinct was to decline given what she knew about Ashley's relationship with Marcus. But her investigative strategy required maintaining normal relationships with all employees, including potential co-conspirators who might reveal useful information. "Of course. Let's go to my office." Ashley closed the door behind her and sat down with the nervous energy of someone preparing to make a significant disclosure. "I think there might be some financial irregularities in how Marcus has been handling certain vendor relationships. I've noticed charges for services that don't seem to match any work I'm aware of, and when I've asked him about them, his explanations haven't been very clear." Victoria struggled to maintain a neutral expression while processing the implications of Ashley's statement. If Ashley was genuinely concerned about financial irregularities, it suggested she might not be a willing participant in Marcus's conspiracy. But it could also be a sophisticated attempt to probe Victoria's knowledge or manipulate her investigation. "What kind of irregularities have you noticed?" "Consulting fees for companies I've never heard of, travel expenses that don't match Marcus's official schedule, charges for services that never seem to produce any actual deliverables. I started keeping notes because some of the vendors have been calling to follow up on work that Marcus apparently promised but never communicated to the rest of us." Ashley pulled out a small notebook and showed Victoria several pages of handwritten observations that correlated closely with Emma's findings. The documentation suggested that Ashley had been conducting her own informal investigation of Marcus's activities, possibly driven by concerns about her own professional liability. "Ashley, have you discussed these concerns with Marcus directly?" "I tried, but he told me that high-level business relationships operate differently than routine vendor management and that I shouldn't worry about details that were above my pay grade." That response actually made me more concerned, not less. The dismissive language was identical to what Marcus had used with Victoria, suggesting it was his standard response to anyone who questioned his financial decisions. "Have you noticed anything else that seemed unusual or concerning?" Ashley hesitated, clearly debating whether to share additional information. "Marcus has been asking me to help with research on company valuation methods and business sale procedures. He said it was related to long-term strategic planning, but the specific questions he's been asking seem more focused on how to transfer assets and client relationships than how to grow the existing business." Victoria felt a chill of recognition. Marcus had been using Ashley to research the technical aspects of his theft while maintaining plausible explanations for his questions. "Ashley, I appreciate you bringing these concerns to me. I think it's important that we document any financial irregularities carefully before taking any formal action. Would you be willing to provide me with copies of your notes and any other documentation you've compiled?" "Absolutely. I've been worried that someone might try to blame me for not reporting potential problems earlier." After Ashley left, Victoria sat in her office processing the implications of their conversation. Ashley's apparent ignorance of Marcus's broader conspiracy suggested that he had been compartmentalizing his activities using different people for different aspects of his planning, without revealing the overall strategy to any single co-conspirator. But Ashley's willingness to document irregularities and report them to Victoria also presented an opportunity. If Ashley was genuinely concerned about financial misconduct rather than actively participating in it, She could potentially serve as a witness to Marcus's activities and provide additional evidence of his fraudulent intent. Victoria called Rebecca Santos to discuss this development and its implications for their investigation strategy. Victoria, this is actually very good news. If Ashley is documenting Marcus's activities independently and expressing concerns about financial irregularities, it suggests she's not a willing participant in his conspiracy. More importantly, it means you have a potential ally inside his operation who can provide real-time intelligence about his activities. Do you think I should trust her completely? Not yet. Ashley's involvement with Marcus, personal or professional, makes her a potential risk regardless of her stated concerns. But you can certainly use her willingness to document irregularities to expand your evidence collection without revealing the full scope of your investigation. Rebecca paused, and Victoria could hear papers rustling as she reviewed her notes. Actually, Ashley's observations about Marcus asking for research on business valuation and asset transfers are extremely valuable. That type of research suggests Marcus is preparing to execute his plan relatively soon, which means we need to accelerate our timeline for building a comprehensive case. How much time do you think we have? Based on what you've described, probably no more than 6 to 8 weeks before Marcus makes some kind of move. The good news is that we now have multiple independent sources documenting his activities, which will make our case much stronger when we're ready to move. Thursday brought another crucial development when Victoria decided to investigate the consulting firms that Marcus had been paying. Using the contact information from Aurora Digital's vendor files, she began making discreet inquiries about the nature of their services and their relationship with Marcus. Sterling Business Advisors proved to be a legitimate consulting firm specializing in business valuation and sale preparation. When Victoria called their main number and spoke with the receptionist, she learned that Marcus had engaged them to conduct a confidential valuation of Aurora Digital Marketing for internal planning purposes. I'm calling to follow up on the valuation work you completed for Aurora Digital Marketing. Could you tell me the status of that project? Let me transfer you to Mr. Patterson, who handled that engagement. James Patterson was pleasant but cautious when Victoria identified herself as Aurora Digital's Chief Strategy Officer. Ms. Sterling Hayes, I have to say I'm a bit surprised to hear from you. Mr. Hayes specifically requested that all communications about the valuation be directed exclusively to him. He indicated that the work was confidential and that other company officers weren't to be involved until the preliminary analysis was complete. Victoria felt her anger building as she realized that Marcus had explicitly excluded her from a business valuation of her own company. Mr. Patterson, I need to clarify something about our corporate structure. As the controlling shareholder of Sterling Holdings, which owns Aurora Digital Marketing, I have ultimate authority over all strategic decisions, including business valuations. Mr. Hayes should not have engaged your services without my knowledge and approval. The pause that followed suggested that Patterson was beginning to understand the implications of what Victoria was telling him. Ms. Sterling Hayes, I think there may have been some miscommunication about the authorization for our services. Mr. Hayes represented himself as having full authority to engage us for this valuation work. What exactly did the valuation work involve? A comprehensive analysis of Aurora Digital's financial performance, market position, and sale value under various scenarios. Mr. Hayes was particularly interested in valuations that assumed streamlined management structure and optimized operational efficiency. Victoria recognized the euphemisms streamlined management structure meant eliminating her involvement and optimized operational efficiency meant transferring operations to Marcus's exclusive control. Mr. Patterson, I need to see all documentation related to this engagement, including the preliminary valuation report and any communications with Mr. Hayes. I'll need to review our confidentiality agreement with Mr. Hayes before providing any documentation. Can I call you back within 24 hours? After ending the call, Victoria immediately contacted Rebecca Santos to discuss the legal implications of Marcus's unauthorized business valuation. Victoria, this is huge. Marcus can't legally engage consultants to value a company he doesn't own, especially when he's misrepresenting his authority to those consultants. This gives us clear evidence of fraudulent misrepresentation in addition to the embezzlement charges. What should I do about Sterling Business Advisors? Let me handle that. I'll contact Patterson directly and explain the legal situation. He'll be motivated to cooperate once he understands that Marcus misrepresented his authority and that the firm could face liability for participating in an unauthorized valuation. Friday brought Victoria's most significant discovery yet, when Emma Chen provided her with access to Marcus's email correspondence through the administrative backup system. "Victoria, I found something you need to see immediately." Emma said, her voice tight with anxiety. The email thread Emma had discovered was between Marcus and someone identified only as T. Brighton, with an email address at Phoenix Consulting Solutions. The correspondence covered a 6-month period and revealed the full scope of Marcus's conspiracy in devastating detail. The earliest email, dated 10 months ago, showed Marcus initiating contact with Phoenix Consulting about partnership restructuring opportunities for a successful marketing firm with complicated ownership dynamics. Brighton's response had been professional but direct. "We specialize in helping entrepreneurs optimize business structures that may have become inefficient due to historical partnership arrangements. Our typical process involves comprehensive analysis of legal vulnerabilities, strategic planning for ownership transition, and execution support for asset protection strategies." Subsequent emails revealed that Marcus had provided Phoenix Consulting with detailed financial information about Aurora Digital, copies of their corporate governance agreements, and strategic assessments of Victoria's role in the company's operations. Most damning was an email from Marcus dated 5 months ago. Target timeline remains March for initial asset transitions with complete reorganization by May. VH becoming increasingly suspicious of consulting expenses, but still appears unaware of broader strategy. Need to accelerate contingency planning in case early detection requires modified timeline. Victoria read the email 3 times, struggling to process the coldly calculated language Marcus had used to describe stealing her life's work. The reference to VH, her own initials, as a potential obstacle to be managed rather than a human being with legitimate rights, was particularly devastating. Brighton's response had been equally chilling. "Recommend implementing communication security protocols and establishing alternative documentation storage. Early detection scenarios require rapid execution capabilities that may not be feasible if primary strategy documents remain accessible to VH." The email thread continued through the previous week, with Marcus providing updates on his progress and timeline adjustments. But what Victoria found most disturbing was the evolution of Marcus's language over the 6-month period. His early emails had shown some hesitation and moral uncertainty about his plans. By the final exchanges, he was discussing her elimination from the company with the casual efficiency of someone planning a routine business transaction. "Rebecca, I found something that changes everything," Victoria said during her evening call with her attorney. "I have 6 months of email correspondence between Marcus and Phoenix Consulting that documents the entire conspiracy in his own words." Victoria read excerpts from the most damaging emails, watching Rebecca's expression shift from professional interest to genuine alarm as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. "Victoria, this is overwhelming evidence of criminal intent. These emails prove premeditation, systematic planning, and deliberate deception that will support the most serious charges possible. But they also reveal something else we need to address immediately." "What do you mean?" "Marcus has been planning this for almost a year, which means he's had time to establish backup plans and alternative strategies. If he suspects you're investigating, he might accelerate his timeline or implement contingency measures we haven't anticipated." The weekend brought an unexpected development that confirmed Rebecca's concerns about Marcus's contingency planning. On Saturday morning, Marcus announced that he would be traveling to Seattle the following week for what he described as exploratory meetings with potential strategic partners. "It's preliminary discussions about possible collaboration opportunities," he said with the casual confidence of someone who believed his lies were still effective. "Nothing concrete yet, but worth exploring." Victoria recognized the language from the Phoenix Consulting documents. Strategic partners was likely code for investors or acquisition targets who would facilitate the asset transfer Marcus had been planning. The Seattle location was also suspicious, given that Rebecca had mentioned several high-profile business dissolution cases involving Pacific Northwest companies. "How long will you be gone?" "Probably 3 or 4 days. Maybe longer if the conversations prove productive." The extended timeline suggested that Marcus's Seattle trip would involve more than casual exploration. Victoria suspected he was preparing to execute the next phase of his conspiracy, possibly establishing the legal and financial infrastructure necessary for transferring Aurora Digital's assets to his new company. After Marcus left for his Saturday morning golf game, another routine that had become suspiciously regular over the past few months, Victoria spent the afternoon conducting a more thorough search of his home office. Hidden behind legal texts in his bookshelf, she found a second manila folder that contained documents even more damaging than the Phoenix consulting materials. The folder included draft legal agreements for transferring Aurora Digital's major client contracts to Hayes Digital Solutions financial projections showing the new company's anticipated revenue based on stolen client relationships, and most shocking of all, a comprehensive timeline document that outlined Marcus's strategy for eliminating Victoria from the business entirely. The timeline was brutally clinical in its approach. Month 1 to 3, establish alternative business entity, and secure professional advisory services for transition planning. Month 6. Begin systematic client relationship management to facilitate future migration while maintaining plausible operational rationale. Month 7 to 9. Implement graduated asset protection strategies and establish legal framework for ownership transition. Month 10 to 12. Execute partnership dissolution through negotiated settlement or forced restructuring depending on target cooperation level. Month 13 to 15. Complete client and asset migration to optimize business structure with streamlined management authority. The document was dated 14 months ago, revealing that Marcus had been planning his conspiracy for more than a year, almost from the moment Aurora Digital had achieved substantial profitability. The systematic nature of his approach suggested that he viewed Victoria's elimination not as an unfortunate necessity, but as a strategic objective that would enhance his personal wealth and professional status. Most devastating was a section titled Target Management Strategies that outlined psychological manipulation techniques designed to make Victoria more compliant and less likely to resist the planned partnership dissolution, gradual authority reduction through operational restructuring and strategic exclusion from decision-making processes, systematic confidence undermining through questioning of judgment and professional capabilities, emotional isolation through relationship triangulation and support network disruption, financial dependency creation through expense control and resource limitation. Victoria recognized every technique described in the document as strategies Marcus had been implementing over the past year. His dismissive responses to her concerns, his exclusion from important meetings, his suggestions that she was overreacting to normal business situations, all of it had been deliberately calculated to weaken her position and make her easier to eliminate when he was ready to execute his plan. The psychological manipulation was almost more devastating than the financial fraud. Marcus hadn't just been stealing her money. He'd been systematically undermining her confidence and judgment in preparation for destroying her professionally. The man she'd loved and trusted had been conducting psychological warfare against her while maintaining the facade of a concerned husband. Sunday evening brought Victoria's final discovery in Marcus's home office, a secure laptop hidden in a locked drawer that she managed to access using techniques Rebecca had taught her for evidence preservation. The laptop contained additional email correspondence, financial records, and most importantly, detailed communications with other co-conspirators she hadn't previously identified. The email account on the hidden laptop revealed that Marcus had been in regular contact with 3 Aurora Digital clients about upcoming changes in service delivery structure that would occur after an anticipated ownership transition at the company. He had essentially been stealing clients while they still belonged to Victoria's company, using his position as CEO to negotiate future relationships based on fraudulent representations about his authority. Even more disturbing were communications with a private investigator who had been conducting background research on Victoria's financial assets, personal relationships, and potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited during the planned partnership dissolution. Marcus had literally hired professionals to find ways to destroy her more effectively. The hidden laptop also contained financial records showing that Marcus had established multiple business accounts and credit facilities under the Hayes Digital Solutions, names some of which had been funded through diverted Aurora Digital resources. The scope of Marcus's financial infrastructure was staggering in its sophistication. Victoria discovered that he'd established not just Hayes Digital Solutions, but an entire network of shell companies designed to facilitate asset transfers and hide the source of diverted funds. Pacific Northwest Consulting LLC, Cascade Business Development, and Strategic Marketing Associates, all registered in different states, all controlled by Marcus through various legal mechanisms. Each entity served a specific purpose in his overall conspiracy. Pacific Northwest Consulting had been positioned as a vendor that could legitimately receive payments from Aurora Digital for services that were never actually provided. Cascade Business Development held intellectual property rights that Marcus had been gradually transferring from Aurora Digital without Victoria's knowledge. Strategic marketing associates maintained client relationships and contracts that could be activated when Marcus was ready to execute his theft. The financial records revealed payments flowing between these entities in complex patterns designed to obscure their ultimate purpose. Money would flow from Aurora Digital to Pacific Northwest Consulting for specialized consulting services, then be transferred to Cascade Business Development for intellectual property licensing, before finally arriving in Hayes Digital Solutions, accounts as investment capital. Marcus had essentially been laundering Aurora Digital's money through multiple corporate entities to fund his competing business while creating legal documentation that would make the transfers appear legitimate to casual inspection. The level of planning required for this structure suggested he'd been working with sophisticated legal and financial advisors for much longer than the Phoenix consulting timeline indicated. Victoria spent hours tracing the money flows, creating diagrams that showed how Marcus had systematically drained approximately $320,000 from Aurora Digital over 18 months while building the infrastructure necessary to steal her clients and employees. The pattern was clear. Every major business milestone for Aurora Digital had triggered increased asset diversion as Marcus positioned himself to benefit from their success while eliminating her from the equation. But the financial fraud was only part of Marcus's strategy. The hidden laptop contained detailed psychological profiles of Aurora Digital's key employees, apparently prepared by the private investigator Marcus had hired. Each profile included personal information, professional vulnerabilities, and recommendations for recruitment strategies that could be used to persuade employees to join Hayes Digital Solutions. Emma Chen's profile noted her concerns about work-life balance and recommended offering her a more senior title with fewer operational responsibilities. Justin Miller, their lead developer, was identified as being motivated primarily by technical challenges and creative freedom, rather than financial compensation. Sarah Williams, their client relationship manager, was described as ambitious but feeling undervalued at Aurora Digital, making her a prime candidate for recruitment with promises of partnership opportunities. The profiles revealed that Marcus had been systematically studying their employees' weaknesses and motivations, preparing to poach Aurora Digital's most valuable human resources when he executed his plan. He'd been conducting regular mentoring conversations with key staff members, ostensibly to support their professional development, but actually gathering intelligence about their dissatisfactions and career aspirations. Most disturbing was a section titled VH Management Strategies that outlined Marcus's approach to managing Victoria during the transition period. The document recommended gradual confidence erosion through systematic questioning of judgment and decision-making capabilities, and emotional isolation through strategic limitation of professional recognition and social support. Victoria recognized every technique described in the document as tactics Marcus had been implementing over the past year. His suggestions that she was overthinking business decisions, his exclusion from important client meetings, his dismissive responses to her strategic recommendations. All of it had been deliberately calculated. Psychological manipulation designed to weaken her position and make her easier to eliminate. The private investigator's reports included comprehensive background research on Victoria's personal finances, professional relationships, and potential legal vulnerabilities. Marcus had been gathering information about her business network, looking for ways to isolate her from potential allies who might support her during the planned partnership dissolution. The investigator had even researched Victoria's family relationships and personal history, apparently looking for emotional or psychological leverage that could be used against her. The level of invasion was breathtaking in its thoroughness and cruelty. Marcus had literally hired professionals to find ways to destroy her more effectively. Victoria discovered emails between Marcus and the private investigator, discussing surveillance of her activities, including monitoring her communications and tracking her location during business trips. The investigation had extended to her personal relationships with the detective, providing detailed reports on her friendship with Rebecca Santos and other potential sources of support. The surveillance had revealed that Victoria's main vulnerabilities were her tendency to question her own judgment when faced with sustained gaslighting and her reluctance to involve others in personal conflicts. The investigator had recommended that Marcus continue his psychological manipulation while isolating her from professional and personal support networks. Reading through the reports, Victoria felt violated in ways that went beyond financial theft or professional betrayal. Marcus had invaded every aspect of her private life, turning their marriage into a weapon for gathering intelligence that could be used to destroy her. The man she'd shared her deepest fears and insecurities with had been documenting them for use against her. But Marcus's most sophisticated manipulation had involved Ashley Kim. The hidden laptop revealed that Ashley's involvement hadn't been a spontaneous affair that evolved into business partnership. Instead, Marcus had specifically recruited her as part of his long-term strategy, identifying her as someone who could serve multiple purposes in his conspiracy. Ashley's initial hire as marketing coordinator had been part of Marcus's plan. Her background included experience with business development and client relationship management skills that weren't immediately relevant to her official job description, but would be valuable when Marcus launched Hayes Digital Solutions. He'd been training her for over a year to eventually serve as his partner in the new company. The romantic relationship had been strategic rather than spontaneous. Marcus had gradually involved Ashley in increasingly confidential business discussions, using their personal relationship to justify her access to sensitive information about Aurora Digital's operations, client relationships, and strategic planning. Ashley's apparent concerns about financial irregularities, which she'd reported to Victoria, had been part of Marcus's contingency planning. If Victoria became too suspicious about his activities, Ashley was positioned to serve as a witness, who could testify that she'd also noticed problems and reported them appropriately. Her cooperation would demonstrate due diligence while providing cover for Marcus's more extensive criminal activities. The emails revealed that Ashley had been much more aware of Marcus's conspiracy than her conversations with Victoria had suggested. She'd been actively participating in client research, competitive analysis, and strategic planning for Hayes Digital Solutions while maintaining her employment at Aurora Digital. Her expressions of concern about Marcus's financial irregularities had been performed rather than genuine. Victoria felt a complex mixture of anger and disappointment as she processed Ashley's role in the conspiracy. The young woman she'd viewed as a potential ally had actually been a sophisticated co-conspirator who'd been gathering intelligence and preparing for Aurora Digital's destruction. Ashley's apparent innocence and concern had been carefully crafted deception designed to maintain her access to information while positioning her as a credible witness if Victoria's suspicions required management. But perhaps the most devastating discovery was evidence that Marcus had been planning to eliminate Victoria, not just from Aurora Digital, but from the marketing industry entirely. The hidden laptop contained communications with industry contacts about spreading rumors regarding Victoria's instability and declining professional judgment. Marcus had been preparing a whisper campaign that would damage Victoria's reputation throughout Denver's business community, making it difficult for her to start a new company or find employment with competitors after he completed his theft of Aurora Digital. The character assassination was designed to be subtle but effective, relying on Marcus's extensive professional network to spread concerns about Victoria's reliability and competence. The planned reputation destruction included false stories about erratic behavior, poor judgment on client matters, and conflicts with employees that would be attributed to stress and personal problems. Marcus had been preparing to position himself as the responsible partner who'd tried to help Victoria through difficult times, before ultimately being forced to protect the company's interests by assuming sole control. He had essentially been building a parallel company using her money while planning to compete against her with her own clients. By Sunday night, Victoria had compiled evidence of a criminal conspiracy that extended far beyond what she'd initially suspected. Marcus hadn't just been planning to steal her company, he'd been systematically dismantling her entire professional and financial life while establishing the infrastructure necessary to profit from her destruction. The evidence was overwhelming: an irrefutable financial fraud conspiracy, psychological manipulation, client theft, and breach of fiduciary duty on a scale that would likely result in years of prison time and complete financial ruin for Marcus. Monday morning brought Victoria's coordinated legal response. Rebecca Santos had assembled a team of specialists, including a criminal prosecutor who specialized in white-collar crimes, a forensic accountant who would analyze the financial evidence, and a private investigator who would document any additional evidence of Marcus's criminal activities. The team met at Rebecca's law office in Seattle, reviewing the comprehensive evidence package Victoria had compiled over the past 3 weeks. The response was immediate and unanimous. Marcus had committed multiple felonies that would likely result in substantial prison time and complete financial ruin. Victoria, I've been practicing criminal law for 23 years, and I've rarely seen a case with this level of documented evidence, said David Chen, the criminal prosecutor Rebecca had recommended. The combination of financial fraud conspiracy documentation and psychological manipulation evidence creates an overwhelming case for conviction on multiple charges. The forensic accountant Maria Santos had spent the weekend analyzing Aurora Digital's financial records and had identified additional irregularities that Victoria hadn't discovered. Beyond the obvious consulting fraud, Mr. Hayes has been systematically inflating expense reports using company credit cards for personal purchases and manipulating client billing procedures to generate additional revenue that he's been diverting to personal accounts, Maria explained. The total financial damage appears to exceed $250,000 over an 18-month period. The private investigator James Rodriguez had been conducting discreet surveillance and background research that revealed additional aspects of Marcus's deception. Mr. Hayes has been maintaining a second apartment in Seattle under the name of his consulting company, Hayes Digital Solutions. He's also established business banking accounts and credit facilities that appear to be funded partially through diverted Aurora Digital resources. Most significantly, he's been in regular contact with several Aurora Digital clients about potential service transitions that would occur after an anticipated ownership change at the company. Victoria felt simultaneously vindicated and devastated as the full scope of Marcus's criminal enterprise became clear. Her husband hadn't just been planning to steal her company, he'd been systematically looting it for over a year, while establishing the infrastructure necessary to compete against her using her own resources and client relationships. The legal team's recommendation was swift and decisive: file criminal complaints immediately. While Marcus was in Seattle, secure emergency court orders, freezing all business assets, and begin civil litigation seeking both financial recovery and punitive damages that would prevent Marcus from benefiting from his criminal activities. Victoria, we're going to destroy him, Rebecca said with the quiet confidence of someone who'd built a career on complex litigation. By the time we're finished, Marcus will face years in prison, complete financial ruin, and professional disgrace that will prevent him from working in any business capacity for the rest of his life. The legal team worked through Monday night preparing criminal complaints, asset freeze orders, and civil litigation documents that would be filed the moment Marcus returned from Seattle. Victoria felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety as the investigation phase finally transitioned into active prosecution. But she also felt something she hadn't experienced in months: complete confidence in her own judgment and capabilities. Marcus's systematic psychological manipulation had been designed to make her doubt herself and defer to his authority. The comprehensive evidence of his criminal activities had not only vindicated her suspicions, but revealed that her instincts and analytical capabilities were far superior to his tactical planning. The woman Marcus had attempted to psychologically manipulate into compliance had instead become the architect of his complete destruction. His own documentation of his crimes would be used to ensure that he faced the maximum possible consequences for his betrayal. Tuesday morning brought the beginning of legal proceedings that would ultimately expose Marcus's conspiracy to law enforcement, the business community, and his own family. Court orders were filed freezing all Aurora Digital assets and preventing any unauthorized transfers. Criminal complaints were submitted to the FBI's white-collar crime unit, supported by the overwhelming evidence Victoria had compiled. The investigation phase was complete. Victoria had uncovered a criminal conspiracy that extended back over a year, involved multiple co-conspirators and professional services, and represented one of the most sophisticated business fraud schemes the legal team had encountered. Marcus's carefully planned theft of her life's work was about to become the foundation of his own complete destruction. The confrontation phase was ready to begin. The call came at 7:30 Tuesday morning, while Victoria was reviewing the final legal documents that would destroy Marcus's life. Rebecca Santos's voice carried the sharp edge of someone delivering news that would accelerate their timeline dramatically. Victoria Marcus just returned from Seattle early. He's scheduled to be at the office in 2 hours, and according to our surveillance, he's carrying multiple briefcases and appears agitated. I think something went wrong with his Seattle meetings, which means he might be preparing to execute contingency plans we haven't anticipated. Victoria felt her pulse quicken as she processed the implications. Marcus's early return suggested either that his conspiracy had been accelerated or that he'd encountered obstacles that were forcing him to modify his strategy. Either scenario represented a potential threat to the carefully orchestrated legal response they'd been preparing. What does this mean for our timeline? It means we move to active engagement immediately. The criminal complaints and asset freeze orders are ready to file, but I think we need to force Marcus into a public confession before he has time to destroy evidence or disappear with whatever resources he's already hidden. Rebecca paused, and Victoria could hear papers rustling as she reviewed their strategic options. Victoria, I think it's time to execute the confrontation plan we discussed. If we can get Marcus to admit his conspiracy in front of witnesses, particularly his family, it will eliminate any possibility of him claiming the evidence was fabricated or misunderstood. The confrontation plan had been Rebecca's idea. Create a situation where Marcus would be forced to reveal his intentions publicly, while Victoria was prepared to counter with irrefutable evidence of his criminal activities. The psychological impact of being exposed in front of people whose respect he valued would be devastating, while the legal value of a public confession would be enormous. What kind of confrontation scenario do you recommend? Christmas dinner. It's this weekend. Marcus will be relaxed and confident his family will be present as witnesses, and the holiday setting will make him less likely to suspect that you're prepared for a strategic counterstrike. Victoria felt a chill as she realized that Rebecca was suggesting she weaponize the most sacred family tradition to destroy her husband. But given the comprehensive evidence of Marcus's betrayal and the sophisticated nature of his conspiracy, the suggestion felt more like justice than cruelty. Rebecca, what if Marcus doesn't confess? What if he maintains his denials even when confronted with evidence? Then we proceed with criminal prosecution and civil litigation based on the evidence we've already compiled. But Victoria, I've seen this pattern before. Men like Marcus, who've spent months planning elaborate conspiracies, can't resist explaining their brilliance when they think they've won. If we create the right scenario, he'll confess everything. Wednesday morning brought an unexpected complication when Marcus announced that he wanted to host Christmas dinner at their home for the first time in their marriage. His parents, Robert and Linda Hayes, his brother Kevin, and Kevin's wife, Sarah, would be joining them for what Marcus described as a special celebration with important announcements. I've been thinking about family traditions, Marcus said over breakfast, his demeanor suggesting excitement rather than the anxiety Victoria would have expected from someone whose criminal conspiracy was about to be exposed. We've always gone to my parents' house, but I think it's time we took on the responsibility of hosting. I have some significant news to share with everyone. Victoria recognized the language from the Phoenix consulting documents. Marcus was planning to use Christmas dinner to announce his intention to leave her and steal the company, probably framing it as a difficult but necessary business decision that would benefit everyone involved. What kind of news? Business developments that will affect our family's future. Changes that I think everyone will be excited about once they understand the full scope of what I've been planning. The casual confidence in Marcus's voice was almost impressive in its audacity. He was planning to announce his betrayal and theft as if they were positive developments that deserved family celebration and support. That sounds wonderful, Victoria replied, maintaining the supportive wife persona she'd been perfecting for 3 weeks. I'll call your mother to let her know about the change in plans. After Marcus left for the office, Victoria immediately called Rebecca to discuss the implications of hosting Christmas dinner at their home. The change in venue would provide additional opportunities for evidence presentation and strategic positioning, but it would also require more sophisticated preparation to ensure that Marcus's confession was properly documented. Victoria, this is actually perfect. Hosting at your home gives us complete control over the environment, the guest list, and the documentation process. We can have recording equipment in place, position witnesses strategically, and ensure that Marcus has no opportunity to escape or destroy evidence when his conspiracy is exposed. Rebecca had already been coordinating with the legal team to prepare for the confrontation scenario. David Chen, the criminal prosecutor, had recommended specific techniques for eliciting confessions that would be admissible in court proceedings. Maria Santos, the forensic accountant, had prepared visual presentations of the financial evidence that would be impossible for Marcus to deny or explain away. What about his family? Won't they be traumatized by witnessing this confrontation? Victoria Marcus chose to involve his family by planning to announce his betrayal at a holiday dinner. We're simply ensuring that they hear the complete truth rather than his fabricated version of events. They deserve to know who Marcus really is, and their reactions will serve as additional evidence of his deception. Thursday brought another crucial development when Emma Chen discovered that Marcus had been conducting urgent meetings with Aurora Digital's major clients, apparently accelerating his timeline for client migration to Hayes Digital Solutions. Victoria Marcus has scheduled emergency meetings with the Morrison Group Pacific Industries and Sterling Communications for tomorrow afternoon. He's told them there are significant changes coming to Aurora Digital's service delivery structure that will require immediate attention. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Marcus was clearly preparing to execute his client theft immediately after Christmas dinner, probably expecting that his announcement would leave Victoria too devastated and confused to mount an effective response. Emma, I need you to document everything about these meetings. Who's attending, what topics are being discussed, any materials Marcus is preparing or presenting. Can you do that without alerting him to your surveillance? Already on it. I've also been monitoring his email correspondence, and he's been exchanging messages with someone at Westbrook Investment Group about finalizing transition documentation and implementing asset protection protocols. Westbrook Investment Group was a name Victoria recognized from the Phoenix consulting documents, a firm that specialized in business acquisitions and partnership dissolutions. Marcus was apparently working with multiple professional advisors to ensure that his theft would be executed smoothly and legally protected. Friday afternoon brought Victoria's final preparation for the Christmas dinner confrontation. Rebecca had provided her with a sophisticated recording system that would capture audio and video evidence of Marcus's confession while remaining completely hidden from view. The legal team had also prepared a comprehensive evidence package that would be presented during the dinner, including financial records, email correspondence, and timeline documentation that would make Marcus's denials impossible. Victoria remembered that the goal isn't just to expose Marcus's conspiracy. We want to ensure that he confesses to specific criminal acts in front of witnesses who can testify about his statements. The more detail he provides about his planning and execution, the stronger our criminal case becomes. Rebecca had spent Friday morning coaching Victoria on interrogation techniques that would encourage Marcus to reveal information while maintaining her cover as an unsuspecting victim until the strategic moment for revelation. The key is to let Marcus believe he's in control of the situation until you're ready to destroy him completely. Ask questions that seem supportive or confused rather than accusatory. Let him explain his brilliance and justify his actions. The more he talks, the more evidence we'll have. Christmas Eve brought an unexpected quiet moment that Victoria knew would be her last peaceful evening before everything changed forever. She sat in her home office, surrounded by the evidence of Marcus's betrayal, reflecting on the journey from discovery to strategic response that had consumed the past month. The woman who had initially questioned her own perceptions when confronted with Marcus's gaslighting had become someone capable of orchestrating his complete destruction. The comprehensive investigation had not only vindicated her suspicions, but revealed analytical and strategic capabilities that Marcus had spent years trying to undermine. Tomorrow's confrontation would determine whether justice prevailed or whether Marcus's sophisticated conspiracy succeeded in destroying everything she'd built. But Victoria felt confident in her preparation and her legal position. Marcus had documented his own crimes so thoroughly that his guilt was undeniable, and his arrogance had prevented him from anticipating that his victim might be capable of mounting such a comprehensive counterattack. The psychological manipulation that was supposed to make her compliant had instead motivated her to build an irrefutable case for his destruction. His systematic undermining of her confidence had been replaced by absolute certainty in her own judgment and capabilities. Christmas morning brought deceptively normal holiday traditions that felt surreal given what Victoria knew was coming. Marcus prepared breakfast with apparent genuine affection, gave her thoughtful gifts that seemed to reflect real knowledge of her preferences, and maintained the loving husband persona so effectively that she found herself questioning whether the evidence could possibly be accurate. But the evidence was undeniable, and Marcus's performance only demonstrated the sophisticated level of deception he'd been maintaining throughout their marriage. The man who could fake genuine love on Christmas morning was certainly capable of the calculated betrayal documented in his own correspondence. The Hayes family arrived at 4 o'clock, bringing traditional holiday energy that made Victoria feel guilty about what she was preparing to unleash. Robert and Linda Hayes had always treated her with respect and affection despite their traditional views about marriage and business roles. Kevin and Sarah were genuinely warm people who had become close friends over the years, but they deserved to know the truth about Marcus, and their presence would serve as crucial witnesses to whatever he revealed during the evening's confrontation. Victoria, this is such a lovely change, Linda Hayes said as she surveyed the dining room decorations Victoria had spent hours arranging. Marcus told us you wanted to host this year as a special celebration. He's been so excited about sharing his news with everyone. The casual reference to Marcus's anticipated announcement confirmed that he'd been preparing his family for significant revelations. Victoria wondered what version of events he'd given them to justify his excitement about devastating news. He's been very mysterious about whatever he's planning to announce, Victoria replied, maintaining the curious but supportive tone she'd been practicing. I'm looking forward to hearing what he's been working on. Dinner proceeded with normal holiday conversation about family updates, business developments, and community news. Marcus was particularly animated, clearly anticipating his planned announcement with the excitement of someone who believed he was about to achieve a major victory. Before we move to dessert, Marcus said, standing and reaching for his wine glass with theatrical precision, I have something important to share with all of you. The table went quiet as Marcus positioned himself for maximum impact, his confidence suggesting someone who had rehearsed this moment extensively. This family has always been my foundation, and your support has made everything I've accomplished possible. Aurora Digital Marketing has grown beyond my wildest dreams, and I've been presented with opportunities that will take the company to levels we never imagined. Marcus paused for effect, his eyes finding Victoria's face before continuing. But success requires making difficult decisions. It requires having the courage to embrace change, even when that change affects the people we care about most. Victoria felt her pulse quicken as she recognized that Marcus was building toward his planned announcement of betrayal. The truth is that Victoria and I have grown apart over the past year. We want different things, have different visions for the future, different ideas about what success really means. Robert Hayes frowned clearly, not expecting the conversation to take this direction. Linda's face had gone pale, and Kevin was staring at his brother with obvious confusion. Son, what are you saying? Robert asked. I'm saying that sometimes personal relationships can become obstacles to professional growth. Victoria and I have reached a point where our marriage and our business partnership are holding both of us back from reaching our full potential. Marcus's voice carried the practiced cadence of someone delivering a prepared speech, but Victoria could hear the underlying excitement as he approached his moment of planned triumph. I found someone who understands what I've built, someone who appreciates the vision and dedication it takes to run a successful company, someone who can help me take Aurora Digital to heights that wouldn't be possible under the current limitations. The euphemistic language was designed to make his betrayal sound like strategic business planning, rather than personal cruelty and financial fraud. Marcus, Linda whispered, her voice barely audible. Are you saying you're leaving Victoria? I'm saying that I'm choosing to pursue a future with Ashley Kim, who has become my partner in every sense of the word. Together, we're going to transform Aurora Digital into the premier marketing firm in the Pacific Northwest. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria watched the faces around the table process the implications of what Marcus had just announced. The betrayal of his wife, the destruction of his marriage, and the theft of her company presented as positive business developments. Marcus, Kevin finally said, his voice tight with anger. What the hell do you think you're doing? I'm being honest for the first time in months. Ashley understands what I've built. She appreciates the sacrifice and dedication it takes to create something from nothing. She doesn't just coast along taking credit for my accomplishments. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and Victoria realized this was her moment to respond. Marcus had made his confession, revealed his intentions, and positioned himself for maximum vulnerability to her counterattack. That's interesting, Marcus, she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Tell me more about what you've built. Marcus turned toward her with the condescending smile she'd grown to hate, clearly interpreting her question as evidence of weakness rather than strategic positioning. I've built Aurora Digital Marketing into a multi-million-dollar company. I've created jobs for 47 people. I've established our brand as the premier marketing firm in Oregon. I've accomplished things that most people only dream about. And you did all of this. How exactly? Through vision, dedication, and the willingness to make hard decisions that other people aren't capable of making. Through understanding what it takes to build something substantial rather than just supporting from the sidelines. Victoria reached into her purse and withdrew the manila folder she'd prepared, setting it on the table with deliberate care. Marcus, before you continue, There are some facts I think everyone should understand about what you've actually built. The sight of official-looking documents seemed to drain some of the color from Marcus's face, but he maintained his confident posture. Victoria, I don't think this is the appropriate time or place for a detailed business discussion. Actually, I think it's the perfect time. Victoria opened the folder and removed the first set of documents. Because according to these incorporation papers, Aurora Digital Marketing is a subsidiary of Sterling Holdings LLC, and Sterling Holdings is owned entirely by me. The confusion around the table was immediate and obvious. Robert put on his reading glasses and leaned forward to examine the documents Victoria was distributing. I don't understand, Linda said. Marcus, didn't you start the company? We started the company together, Marcus said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. The corporate structure was set up for tax purposes and legal protection. Victoria's holding company was just a financing vehicle. Actually, it wasn't, Victoria replied calmly. When I provided the initial $3.2 million in startup capital, I didn't give you the money. I invested it through my holding company. Aurora Digital has always been my subsidiary company, not our joint venture. She handed copies of the corporate documents to each family member, watching their expressions change as they processed the implications. Marcus has been the CEO of my company for 8 years, not the owner of his own business. That's impossible, Marcus sputtered. We've always been equal partners. You're rewriting history to make yourself look better in front of my family. Victoria removed the next set of documents from her folder. I'm not rewriting anything. But since you mentioned what you've accomplished, I think everyone should know about Phoenix Consulting Solutions. Marcus's face went completely white at the mention of Phoenix Consulting. Over the past 6 months, Marcus has paid $52,000 in company funds to Phoenix Consulting for services designed to eliminate me from my own business. She distributed copies of the consulting agreements and email correspondence, watching the family members' faces as they read Marcus's own words describing his conspiracy. Phoenix Consulting provided Marcus with strategies for stealing my company, transferring my clients, and positioning himself as the sole owner of assets that have always belonged to me. Robert Hayes was reading the email correspondence with growing horror. Marcus, these emails show you planning to defraud your wife of her business. Is this accurate? Dad, you don't understand the complexity of business partnerships. Sometimes ownership structures need to be optimized for operational efficiency. I understand theft, Robert replied, his voice heavy with disgust. And what these documents describe is theft. Victoria continued her presentation, removing financial records that showed the full scope of Marcus's embezzlement. Beyond the Phoenix Consulting payments, Marcus has stolen approximately $250,000 in company funds over the past 18 months. Hotel stays with Ashley, personal shopping expenses, travel costs for their relationship, all charged to my company while he was planning to eliminate me from the business. She handed Linda a photograph of the engagement ring Ashley had been wearing. That ring was purchased with Aurora Digital's American Express card. Marcus used my money to buy jewelry for his affair partner while planning to steal everything I'd built. Kevin was staring at his brother with an expression of complete disbelief. Marcus, is any of this true? It's more complicated than Victoria is making it sound, Marcus said, but his earlier confidence had completely evaporated. Business development requires confidential planning and strategic resource allocation that might not be immediately transparent to all stakeholders. Well, stakeholders. Victoria's voice carried a sharp edge now. Marcus, I'm not a stakeholder. I'm the owner of the company you've been stealing from. She removed the final document from her folder, the timeline Marcus had created outlining his strategy for eliminating her from the business. This is Marcus's own documentation of his plan to destroy me professionally while using my resources to establish a competing business. 14 months of planning to commit fraud, embezzlement, and theft. The timeline document was the most damaging evidence of all, showing the systematic nature of Marcus's conspiracy in his own handwriting. As the family members read through his strategic planning for psychological manipulation and asset theft, their expressions shifted from confusion to horror to outright revulsion. Marcus? Linda said, her voice barely audible. How could you do this to Victoria? How could you do this to your own family? I was trying to build something better, Marcus said desperately. I was trying to create opportunities for growth and success that wouldn't be possible under the current partnership structure. You were trying to steal her company, Robert said flatly. Everything in these documents shows you planning to commit crimes against your wife while using her own money to fund your conspiracy. Victoria stood up, feeling the weight of months of investigation and preparation, culminating in this moment of complete exposure. Marcus, since you've announced your intention to leave me for Ashley and transform Aurora Digital into your own company, I think everyone should know that your employment with Aurora Digital is terminated effective immediately. You can't fire me? Marcus exploded, his composure finally cracking completely. I built that company. I have rights. You have the rights of any employee who's been caught embezzling from their employer, Victoria replied. Which is to say, you have the right to hire an attorney for the criminal charges you'll be facing. She turned to address the stunned family members around the table. The FBI's white-collar crime unit will be arresting Marcus tomorrow morning on charges of embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. The evidence you've seen tonight represents just a portion of what we've compiled over the past month. Marcus was now standing, his face flushed red with rage and panic. This is insane. You can't destroy everything we've built because you're jealous of my relationship with Ashley. I'm not destroying anything, Victoria said calmly. I'm protecting my business from an employee who is planning to steal it. Everything that gets destroyed here was destroyed by your own choices. Linda Hayes was quietly crying, staring at her eldest son with an expression of complete heartbreak. Marcus, how long have you been lying to us? How long have you been planning this? I wasn't lying, Marcus said, his voice rising to near shouting level. I was trying to optimize a business situation that had become inefficient due to unclear partnership dynamics. You were stealing from your wife, Kevin said, his voice heavy with disgust. Every document here shows you planning to commit crimes while lying to everyone who trusted you. Robert had been silent throughout most of the confrontation, reading through the evidence with the methodical attention of someone who'd spent 40 years in business. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of complete moral authority. Marcus, pack your things and leave this house. You're not welcome in this family until you've made full restitution for what you've stolen and served whatever prison sentence the courts determine is appropriate. Dad, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're a thief and a liar who was planning to destroy the woman who trusted you most. Get out of my sight. Marcus looked around the table at his family's faces, seeing nothing but disgust and disappointment reflected back at him. The man who had started the evening expecting celebration and support was now facing complete rejection from everyone whose respect he'd valued. This isn't over, he said, turning toward Victoria with desperate anger. I'll fight this in court. I'll prove that I deserve half of everything we built together. With what money? Victoria asked practically. Your salary was your only income from Aurora Digital. Your personal assets consist of some furniture and whatever's in your checking account. My attorney fees will exhaust your resources long before you can mount any serious legal challenge. The reality of his situation seemed to hit Marcus all at once. Without access to Aurora Digital's resources, without family support and facing serious criminal charges, he had no meaningful way to fight back against the evidence Victoria had compiled. Besides, Victoria continued, any lawsuit you file will require discovery, which means all of your communications with Phoenix Consulting Westbrook Investment Group and Ashley Kim will become public record. Are you really sure you want that level of scrutiny? Marcus stood in the doorway of the dining room, looking at the destroyed remains of his Christmas dinner and his family relationships, clearly struggling to process how completely his planned triumph had become his total defeat. You vindictive bitch, he said finally, his voice carrying the venom of someone whose carefully constructed world had just collapsed. Everything you say in front of these witnesses can be used in the criminal proceedings, Victoria replied calmly. I'd suggest you leave now and contact an attorney immediately. Marcus stormed out of the house, slamming the door with enough force to rattle the windows. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of everything that had just been revealed and destroyed. Linda Hayes was the first to speak, her voice thick with tears and regret. Victoria, I owe you an apology. Multiple apologies, actually. I spent years watching Marcus diminish your contributions to the company while treating you like his assistant rather than his boss. I let my own outdated views about marriage and business cloud my judgment about who you really were. Robert nodded heavily, his expression reflecting both anger at his son and admiration for Victoria's strategic response. Victoria, what Marcus planned to do to you was evil, but what you've done tonight was justice. You've protected yourself and ensured that he'll face appropriate consequences for his crimes. Kevin and Sarah spent the next hour helping Victoria clean up the dinner and listening to additional details about Marcus's conspiracy. Their support felt genuine and healing after months of isolation and deception. Victoria, Kevin said as they prepared to leave, I know this must be devastating personally, but professionally, you've handled this like a master strategist. Marcus thought he was the smart one in your relationship, but he was completely outmatched. 6 months later, Victoria stood in the conference room of Aurora Digital Marketing, now officially renamed Sterling Digital Marketing, addressing an expanded team of 63 employees. The company had not only survived Marcus's attempted theft, but had thrived under her sole leadership, growing by 35% and expanding into 3 new markets. Marcus had been sentenced to 4 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to embezzlement conspiracy to commit fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. The plea agreement had included full restitution of the stolen funds and a permanent ban on working in any financial or executive capacity. His professional reputation had been so thoroughly destroyed that he would likely never work in business again. Ashley Kim had faced her own consequences, losing her job and being charged as an accessory to the conspiracy. She'd eventually moved back to California to live with her parents, leaving behind the dreams of executive power that Marcus had promised her. But the most satisfying outcome had been Victoria's personal transformation. The woman who had once questioned her own perceptions and judgment had become someone who trusted herself completely. The systematic psychological manipulation that was supposed to make her compliant had instead motivated her to build an irrefutable case for Marcus's destruction. Our Q4 results show record growth in both revenue and client satisfaction, Victoria announced to her team. More importantly, we've built a company culture based on trust, transparency, and mutual respect values that will ensure our continued success. The applause that followed felt genuine and earned. Victoria had not only survived Marcus's sophisticated conspiracy, but had used his own methods against him to achieve a level of professional success and personal confidence that would have been impossible under his manipulative influence. Emma Chen, now promoted to Chief Operations Officer, raised her hand with a smile. Victoria, what do you attribute our success to? Victoria thought about the questions, seriously reflecting on the journey from victim to strategic opponent that had defined the past year. I think success comes from understanding that trust is earned through consistency and transparency, not demanded through manipulation and intimidation. When everyone feels valued and heard, when decisions are made based on evidence rather than ego, and when leadership serves the team rather than the other way around, extraordinary things become possible. The meeting ended with discussions of expansion plans and strategic initiatives that reflected Victoria's vision for building something sustainable and ethical, rather than extracting maximum value for a single individual. That evening, Victoria sat in her home office, the same space where she'd first discovered Marcus's financial fraud, reading a letter that had arrived earlier that day. It was from Marcus, written from federal prison, and it carried the tone of someone who had finally begun to understand the magnitude of his crimes. Victoria, I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I just need you to know that I finally understand what I did to you, to us, to the company you built. My therapist says I spent years rewriting history to make myself the hero of a story where I was actually the antagonist. I convinced myself that I deserved credit for your success, that I was somehow entitled to own what you had created. You were right about everything. I was an employee who let ego and insecurity turn me into a criminal. I stole from you, lied to you, and tried to erase you from your own life's work. I know Sterling Digital Marketing is thriving without me, and I know you're happier and more successful than you ever were when I was poisoning everything with my need to be important. The woman I dismissed as just a supportive wife was actually the architect of everything I thought I had built. I hope someday I can become worthy of the second chance you gave me by not pressing for the maximum criminal penalties. Victoria folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer. Marcus's apology felt genuine, but more importantly, it felt irrelevant. Her life had moved so far beyond his influence that his remorse was like an echo from a different era. She had dinner plans with David Chen, the architect she'd been dating for 4 months, a relationship built on mutual respect, shared interests, and genuine appreciation for each other's accomplishments. David had never once tried to diminish her success or suggest that her judgment was somehow flawed. As she prepared to leave the office, Victoria caught her reflection in the window. The woman looking back bore little resemblance to the person who had questioned her own perceptions 8 months ago. This woman stood tall, confident in her own power, secure in relationships built on honesty rather than manipulation. Marcus had intended that Christmas dinner to be her destruction. Instead, it had become her liberation. The best revenge she'd learned wasn't destroying Marcus's life. It was simply living her own fully and successfully. The woman Marcus had systematically tried to diminish had become everything he'd pretended to be: a visionary leader, a successful entrepreneur, and someone whose accomplishments were built on substance rather than theft. Justice had been served not through cruelty, but through truth. And Victoria Sterling had finally become the person she was always meant to be. The weeks following Marcus's arrest had been a whirlwind of media attention, legal proceedings, and business recovery that tested every skill Victoria had developed over her entrepreneurial career. The story of Aurora Digital's CEO being arrested for embezzling from his own wife's company had captured the attention of business journalists throughout the Pacific Northwest, creating both opportunities and challenges for the company's future. Denver Business Weekly had run a front-page story titled, "The Aurora Digital Deception: How a CEO's Betrayal Exposed the Dark Side of Partnership," which provided a detailed timeline of Marcus's conspiracy based on court filings and interviews with legal experts. The article had positioned Victoria as a brilliant strategist who'd outmaneuvered a sophisticated criminal, helping to establish her reputation as the true architect of Aurora Digital's success. But media attention had also brought unwanted scrutiny and questions about how Marcus had been able to execute his conspiracy for so long without detection. Some coverage had implied that Victoria should have discovered the fraud earlier, suggesting that her oversight had been inadequate or that she'd been willfully blind to obvious warning signs. Victoria had learned to navigate media interviews with the same strategic thinking she applied to business challenges, focusing on the systematic nature of Marcus's deception while emphasizing the strength of Aurora Digital's fundamental operations and client relationships. She'd refused to discuss personal aspects of the betrayal, maintaining professional focus on the company's future rather than relitigating the past. The FBI's investigation had uncovered additional evidence that expanded the scope of criminal charges against Marcus. Federal prosecutors had identified connections to other business fraud cases involving Phoenix Consulting Solutions, revealing that Marcus's conspiracy was part of a larger pattern of white-collar crime that affected multiple companies throughout the region. Thomas Brighton, the Phoenix Consulting principal who'd provided Marcus with strategic advice, had been arrested on charges of conspiracy, money laundering, and operating a criminal enterprise. The investigation revealed that Phoenix Consulting had assisted over a dozen business owners in similar schemes to defraud their partners, steal company assets, and manipulate partnership dissolutions. Brighton's conviction had provided additional evidence of Marcus's criminal intent, while demonstrating that his conspiracy was part of a professional criminal network rather than an isolated incident of personal betrayal. The federal charges had carried enhanced penalties that resulted in Marcus receiving a longer prison sentence than he would have faced for simple embezzlement. Ashley Kim's legal situation had been more complex than initially anticipated. While her cooperation with the investigation had reduced her potential criminal liability, the evidence revealed that her participation in Marcus's conspiracy had been extensive and knowing, rather than naive or manipulated. Ashley had ultimately pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges and received 2 years of probation, community service, and restitution payments. Her legal troubles had destroyed her career prospects in marketing and business development, making it unlikely she'd ever work in a professional capacity again. The young woman who'd expected to become Marcus's partner in a new business empire had instead become a cautionary tale about the consequences of criminal greed. The civil litigation against Marcus had been swift and comprehensive. Victoria's legal team had secured judgments for complete restitution of stolen funds, punitive damages, and recovery of legal costs that exceeded $600,000 in total. Marcus's personal assets had been seized and liquidated to satisfy the judgments, leaving him with nothing when he was eventually released from prison. But the most satisfying aspect of Marcus's downfall had been watching his professional reputation disintegrate completely. The Denver business community had rallied around Victoria, recognizing her as a victim who demonstrated remarkable resilience and strategic thinking in response to systematic betrayal. Several former clients had publicly praised Victoria's leadership and expressed relief that Aurora Digital would continue under her sole management. Morrison Industries had actually increased their contract value, citing improved service quality and strategic focus under Victoria's leadership. Pacific Industries had referred 3 new clients specifically because they wanted to work with the company that had demonstrated such integrity under pressure. The Harvard Business Review had published a case study titled Strategic Response to Internal Fraud: The Aurora Digital Recovery, which analyzed Victoria's investigation and legal strategy as a model for executives facing similar betrayals. The article had established her as a thought leader on corporate governance and fraud prevention, leading to speaking engagements and consulting opportunities that enhanced both her reputation and Aurora Digital's market position. Victoria had used the increased visibility to reposition Aurora Digital. Now Sterling Digital Marketing as a company that prioritized transparency, ethical behavior, and genuine partnership with clients. The rebranding had been more than cosmetic. It had represented a fundamental shift toward the values and operational principles that Victoria had always believed would drive sustainable success. The employee response to Marcus's removal had been overwhelmingly positive. Most staff members had observed his increasingly erratic behavior and exclusion of Victoria from decision-making, creating anxiety about the company's direction and stability. Learning that Victoria was actually the owner and would be assuming full control had eliminated uncertainty while providing opportunities for advancement and increased responsibility. Emma Chen's promotion to Chief Operations Officer had been accompanied by a significant salary increase and equity participation that reflected her loyalty and contributions during the crisis. Justin Miller had been promoted to Chief Technology Officer with expanded authority over system development and client technical strategy. Sarah Williams had become Director of Client Relations with responsibility for business development and strategic account management. The promotions had created a leadership team that shared Victoria's commitment to collaborative decision-making, transparent communication, and ethical business practices. Monthly all-hands meetings had replaced Marcus's secretive management style with open discussion of company performance, strategic challenges, and growth opportunities. Sterling Digital Marketing's financial performance had exceeded all projections in the months following Marcus's removal. Revenue had grown by 35%, client satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs, and employee retention had improved dramatically. The company had expanded into Seattle and Portland markets while adding new service offerings in digital strategy, consulting, and brand development. Victoria had also implemented comprehensive governance and oversight procedures designed to prevent future fraud while maintaining operational efficiency. Monthly financial reviews with external auditors, quarterly board meetings with independent advisors, and annual compliance assessments had created accountability structures that protected both the company and its stakeholders. But the most significant change had been in Victoria's personal confidence and professional presence. The woman who'd once questioned her own perceptions and deferred to Marcus's judgment had become someone who trusted her instincts completely and expressed her opinions with authority and conviction. Industry events that had once been sources of anxiety were now opportunities for Victoria to share insights and build relationships with other business leaders. Her presentations on fraud prevention, corporate governance, and strategic leadership had been consistently well received, establishing her as a respected voice in the regional business community. The transformation had been noticed by other entrepreneurs and executives who'd known Victoria during her marriage to Marcus. Several had privately commented that they'd always suspected Marcus was taking credit for Victoria's contributions, but had been impressed by her grace and professionalism in handling the situation. Rebecca Santos had provided ongoing support throughout the legal proceedings and business recovery, helping Victoria navigate the complex emotional and practical challenges of rebuilding her life after such comprehensive betrayal. Their friendship had deepened through the crisis, providing Victoria with a model for relationships based on mutual respect and genuine support rather than manipulation and control. David Chen, the architect. Victoria had begun dating, represented everything Marcus had never been secure in his own accomplishments, genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions, and committed to building something together, rather than competing for dominance. Their relationship had developed slowly and carefully, with both of them taking time to establish trust and compatibility. David's approach to partnership was collaborative and supportive, encouraging Victoria's professional success while maintaining his own career independence. He'd attended several of her speaking engagements and had been genuinely proud of her accomplishments without trying to claim any credit or position himself as her advisor. Victoria's home in the Pearl District had been renovated to remove traces of her life with Marcus, while creating spaces that reflected her own tastes and priorities. The home office where she'd first discovered Marcus's financial fraud had been transformed into a comfortable workspace filled with awards, client testimonials, and photographs that celebrated her professional achievements. The transformation extended to Victoria's personal relationships with Marcus's family, who had maintained contact despite their son's and brother's criminal behavior. Robert and Linda Hayes had become unlikely allies, providing emotional support and serving as character witnesses during the legal proceedings. Linda Hayes had written a letter to the court describing Victoria's character and contributions to Aurora Digital, emphasizing her integrity and professional competence while condemning Marcus's betrayal. The letter had been particularly powerful because it came from someone who'd witnessed their relationship from the beginning and could testify to the systematic nature of Marcus's deception. Kevin and Sarah Hayes had also remained close friends, often joining Victoria and David for dinner or social events. Their continued relationship had provided Victoria with a sense of family continuity, while demonstrating that Marcus's crimes had isolated him from everyone who'd once cared about him. The final chapter of Marcus's story had unfolded in federal prison, where he'd been forced to confront the magnitude of his crimes and their impact on everyone he'd claimed to love. Prison counseling had required him to acknowledge the systematic nature of his deception and the psychological damage he'd inflicted on Victoria through years of manipulation and gaslighting. Marcus's letter from prison had been preceded by several others that Victoria had chosen not to open, recognizing that she owed him nothing and that his remorse, while perhaps genuine, was irrelevant to her future. Reading his final letter had been a deliberate choice to gain closure, rather than because she felt any obligation to forgive or understand his motivations. The letter itself had demonstrated a level of self-awareness that Marcus had never shown during their marriage, acknowledging that his need for recognition and control had driven him to commit increasingly serious crimes against the person who'd trusted him most. His admission that Victoria had been the architect of everything I thought I had built had validated what she'd always known, but had been conditioned to doubt. But more important than Marcus's belated recognition was Victoria's complete independence from his opinion of her worth or contributions. The woman who'd once questioned her own judgment because of his gaslighting had become someone whose self-confidence was internally generated and professionally validated, rather than dependent on external approval. Victoria's story had become a case study in resilient strategic thinking and the power of documentation in exposing sophisticated fraud. Business schools had begun including her experience in curricula on corporate governance and crisis management, using her systematic investigation and legal strategy as models for executives facing similar challenges. The speaking engagements and consulting opportunities that had emerged from her experience had established Victoria as a nationally recognized expert on fraud prevention and ethical leadership. Sterling Digital Marketing had benefited from her increased visibility with clients specifically seeking the company because of Victoria's reputation for integrity and strategic excellence. Looking back on the journey from discovery to justice, Victoria recognized that Marcus's betrayal had ultimately freed her from limitations she'd imposed on herself during their marriage. The systematic undermining of her confidence had been replaced by absolute certainty in her own judgment and capabilities. The woman Marcus had tried to diminish and eliminate had become everything he'd pretended to be: a visionary leader, whose success was built on substance, rather than theft, someone whose accomplishments created value for others rather than extracting it for personal gain. Victoria's story reminds us that the most dangerous betrayals often come wrapped in the language of love and partnership. When someone systematically undermines your reality while stealing your achievements, they're not just committing crimes against your wallet, they're waging war against your very sense of self. But here's what Marcus never understood. True strength isn't about controlling others through manipulation and lies. It's about building something real, something lasting, something that can withstand the light of truth. Victoria transformed from a woman who questioned her own perceptions into someone who trusted herself completely. She learned that the voice telling her, "You're being paranoid," was often the very voice she needed to question most. The most powerful lesson here isn't about revenge, it's about the quiet courage it takes to investigate your own life when something feels wrong. When your instincts are screaming but everyone around you is saying you're overreacting, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust yourself enough to dig deeper. Victoria's story shows us that documentation beats desperation, that patience beats panic, and that the truth, when properly revealed, is the most devastating weapon of all. Marcus spent over a year planning Victoria's destruction, but he made one fatal error. He underestimated the woman whose life he was trying to steal. The systematic psychological manipulation designed to make her compliant instead motivated her to build an ironclad case for his complete downfall. Sometimes the best revenge isn't plotting someone's destruction, it's simply refusing to let them destroy you. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. These stories dive deep into the psychology of betrayal and the sweet satisfaction of strategic justice, exploring what happens when people finally stop accepting manipulation and start fighting back with intelligence and evidence. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Tomorrow we're bringing you another story that will make you question everything you think you know about trust power and the lengths people will go to protect what they've built. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.